Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read Naruto mastered the power of 10-tailed god? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Book and the Beast. The water of the canoe lake was a perfect mirror, holding the lazy afternoon clouds and the deep, impossible blue of a Long Island sky. Percy Jackson, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, was doing absolutely nothing. He lay on his back on the pier, his head in Annabeth's lap, her fingers tracing idle patterns through his unruly black hair. The gentle lapping of the water against the wooden posts was the only sound, a peaceful rhythm that had replaced the clang of swords and the roar of monsters. "You're thinking too loud," Annabeth murmured, not opening her eyes. Sunlight warmed her face, making the golden strands of her hair gleam. "It's distracting me from my rigorous schedule of doing nothing." Percy cracked a smile. "Sorry, just getting used to this." "This?" she asked, her thumb stroking his temple. "The quiet," he said. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or, for a giant metal shoe with laser eyes to drop." Annabeth chuckled, a soft, genuine sound that made his chest ache in the best way. "Hephaestus is on vacation. I think we're safe from giant laser shoes for at least another week." She finally opened her eyes, and the familiar, stormy gray of her irises met his. They were calm today, the calculated storm of the battlefield replaced by a gentle, rolling fog. "We earned this, Percy. Don't question it, just accept it." He wanted to. Gods, he wanted to. After the giant war, after Tartarus, the quiet felt less like a gift and more like the tense silence before an ambush. But looking at her, at the relaxed set of her jaw and the easy way she breathed, he felt some of that tension seep out of him. He reached up, his fingers lacing with hers. Her hand was warm, her grip firm and real. This was real. "Okay, wise girl," he conceded, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "No more thinking. From now on, my brain is a completely monster-free zone." "An empty zone, you mean?" she teased, her lips quirking into a smirk. "Hey." Their laughter was cut short by a shimmering in the air beside the pier. A figure coalesced from the heat haze. Hermes, clad in his familiar running shorts and a Zeus Express polo shirt. His caduceus coiled with two sleepy, grumbling snakes. "Jackson, Chase," Hermes said, his tone all business. "Sorry to interrupt your, whatever this is. Got a summons for Percy." Percy sat up, the peaceful bubble popping instantly. Annabeth's hand tightened in his. "What is it?" she asked, her voice sharp, already shifting back into strategist mode. "A quest, a problem." Hermes shook his head, looking almost bored. "Relax. No world-ending catastrophe today. Just a work order. Your dad and Hephaestus are collaborating on some new aquatic defense grid for Atlantis. Hephaestus needs an extra pair of hands for some heavy lifting and, apparently, someone who won't melt. You're the lucky volunteer." Percy blinked. "Manual labor. On Olympus. That's it. Hephaestus needs a mover. He needs someone with seawater in their veins to handle some Atlantean metal conduits. They short out anyone else who touches them," Hermes explained, checking a glowing celestial bronze tablet. "Look, it's not glamorous. But it's a direct request. Better than cleaning the stables, right?" George, one of the snakes on the caduceus, hissed in agreement. Annabeth relaxed slightly, though her eyes were still wary. "Be careful," she said to Percy, her voice low. "It's just lifting boxes, Annabeth," he said, trying for a reassuring smile. "What could happen?" She didn't return the smile. "With you, I could write a list. Just be careful." He gave her hand one last squeeze. "Always." He stood, brushing the wood splinters from his jeans. "All right, Hermes, let's go move some divine furniture." Hermes tapped him on the shoulder, and the familiar, dizzying sensation of divine transport yanked him from the sunny shores of Camp Half-Blood. The world dissolved into a blur of light and color. And when it snapped back into focus, the air was different. It was hot, thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and something else, a clean, electric tang of immense power. He stood in a wing of Hephaestus's main forge on Olympus. It was a space that defied mortal architecture, a cavern of polished celestial bronze and obsidian, veined with rivers of molten gold that flowed in channels along the floor. Pistons the size of redwood trees hissed and pounded in a distant, steady rhythm, and the air hummed with contained energy. Automatons, from tiny, scuttling metal spiders to massive, gleaming colossi, moved with purpose. Their crystalline eyes glowing with soft blue light. Hephaestus himself was leaning over a massive anvil, his twisted leg supported by a complex mechanical brace. He hammered a piece of glowing metal that seemed to drink the light from the forge. With each strike, sparks flew like newborn stars, and a resonant hum echoed through the chamber. Poseidon stood nearby, looking uncharacteristically out of place in his Bermuda shorts and fishing shirt amidst the fire and steel. He held a trident that shimmered with blue energy, occasionally pointing to a complex schematic that hovered in the air between them. "Ah, good, you're here," Hephaestus grunted without looking up from his work. He gave the metal one last, definitive strike, and the piece pulsed with a soft, internal light before he plunged it into a vat of steaming oil. "Percy, my boy," Poseidon boomed, his smile a welcome sight. "Thanks for lending a hand. Hephaestus has crafted some remarkable things, but they require a delicate touch. Or, rather, a touch that won't get you electrocuted by 10,000 volts of concentrated ocean." "Happy to help," Percy said, nodding to his father and the forge god. "What do you need me to do?" Hephaestus wiped his greasy hands on a rag, his expression as gruff as ever. "Over there," he said, gesturing with his thumb towards a corner of the forge piled high with crates and strange, cylindrical devices that hummed with a low thrum. "Those are the primary conduits for the new system. Atlantean coral metal, only someone of Poseidon's line can handle them safely once they're charged. I need them moved to the main assembly platform. Mind the automatons." It was exactly as Hermes had described, manual labor. Percy felt a genuine wave of relief. He could do this. He could move some boxes, help his dad, and be back at the lake with Annabeth before sunset. No monsters, no prophecies, no fates screwing with his life. The conduits were heavier than they looked, and cool to the touch. Like stone submerged in a deep ocean trench. A faint blue light pulsed within them, matching the rhythm of the waves he could always feel in the back of his mind. He hoisted the first one onto his shoulder and began the trek across the vast forge floor. Automatons glided past him, their movements precise and silent. It was almost peaceful, the rhythmic clang of the god's hammer providing a steady beat. He'd moved half a dozen of the conduits when he noticed the corner they'd come from. It wasn't just a storage area, it was a dumping ground of sorts. Piles of discarded projects, failed experiments, and scraps of rare metals lay in heaps. It was the divine equivalent of a junk drawer. But one thing stood out. Tucked behind a stack of scorched celestial bronze shields was a book. It didn't belong. In a place of metal and fire and divine energy, the book was organic, ancient, and utterly alien. It was bound in what looked like dark, weathered leather, but it had no title, no markings. Just a strange, nine-lobed spiral symbol embossed on the cover. It felt old, older than Olympus, older than the gods. It hummed with a peculiar energy, not the crackling power of the forge, but something deeper, quieter, and infinitely more vast. Curiosity was a dangerous thing for a demigod, a lesson he'd learned the hard way more times than he could count. But he was drawn to it. He set down the conduit he was carrying and walked over, his fingers brushing against the dusty cover. He should have stopped. He should have called out to Hephaestus or his father, asked them what it was. He should have walked away. But he didn't. He picked it up. The moment his skin made contact with the cover, the world ended. It wasn't a bang or a flash of light. It was a silent, violent implosion within his own mind. A tsunami of information, of history, of raw, unfiltered knowledge slammed into his consciousness. It was a billion lifetimes, a billion voices scream, in a language he had never heard but suddenly understood with perfect clarity. Chakra. The word was a key, unlocking a deluge. He saw a world not of gods and monsters, but of shinobi and clans. He saw forests turned to deserts by impossible energies. He saw men who could walk on water, breathe fire, and call lightning from a clear sky with nothing but hand signs and a force that flowed through them like blood. Biju. Jinchuriki. He felt their pain. The loneliness of a young boy with a fox demon sealed in his gut, ostracized by his entire village. The rage of a sand child with a monster haunting his sleep. He felt the weight of their power, the burden of being a human cage for a living weapon. 9 distinct roars of agony and fury echoed in the hollows of his skull. Sharingan, Byakugan, Rinnegan, his vision blurred, overlaid with spinning crimson wheels, pale, veined eyes that saw everything, and spiraling purple patterns that held the power of a god. He saw battles that leveled mountains, techniques that could create forests from nothing, and illusions that could trap a mind for eternity. And then, above it all, came the final, terrifying truth. Jubi, Kagaya, the god tree, he felt it, a power that dwarfed the other 9, a primordial force of nature that was the source of all chakra. He saw a woman with horns and a third eye, a being who had consumed a forbidden fruit and enslaved a world. He felt the birth of the 10 tails, a cataclysmic beast of unimaginable power, and its eventual division into the 9-tailed beasts. The history of an entire world, its wars, its heroes, its villains. Its very system of power, flooded his mind not as a story, but as a memory. It was his. It was inside him. He dropped the book. His hands flew to his head as a seismic skull-splitting pain erupted behind his eyes. He stumbled back, gasping, the roar of the forge fading to a distant buzz. The sheer volume of it was too much. His demigod brain, hardened by years of battle and ADHD, was threatening to fracture under the strain. Percy. His father's voice was a distant echo, a sound from another universe. He couldn't answer. He was drowning, not in water, but in knowledge. It was then that a new sound cut through the haze. A high-pitched, discordant screech that grated on the nerves. It was wrong. All the sounds of the forge were rhythmic, purposeful. This was chaos. A piercing shriek of metal on metal ripped through the air, followed by a thunderous crash. Percy forced his eyes open, his vision swimming. One of the larger automatons, a 10-foot-tall centaur forged from celestial bronze, was spasming violently. Its crystalline blue eyes had turned a furious, flickering red. It swung its massive arms, smashing a rack of divine weapons and sending them scattering across the floor. "My creations," Hephaestus roared, hobbling back. "It's malfunctioning. The core is overloading." Poseidon raised his trident, a wall of shimmering water rising between them and the berserk machine. "Get back. It's going to detonate." The centaur automaton ignored the water barrier, charging straight through it with a hiss of steam. The red light in its eyes intensified, and a terrible, whining sound began to build from its chest cavity, the sound of a star about to go supernova. The gods saw a machine on the verge of exploding. Percy saw something different. Through the blinding pain, through the torrent of alien memories, he saw it with a clarity that was terrifying. He didn't just see the metal shell, he saw the intricate network of energy pathways inside it. He saw the core, a spinning vortex of divine power, now unstable and fractured, leaking raw energy that was corroding the automaton's control systems. He saw the imminent explosion not as a blast of heat and shrapnel, but as a chaotic, uncontrolled release of that energy. And he saw how to stop it. The knowledge wasn't a thought, it was an instinct. It was as natural as breathing, as primal as drawing power from the sea. He didn't decide what to do. His body, now flooded with a new understanding of the universe, simply reacted. He held up his right hand. Poseidon and Hephaestus, bracing for the blast, saw Percy step forward, his expression eerily calm amidst the agony twisting his features. They saw him raise a hand as if to ward off the blow. But Percy felt something else entirely. He felt a pull in the pit of his stomach, a deep, resonant well of power that was infinitely vaster than his connection to the ocean. He felt two distinct, yet balanced, energies gathering in his palm. One was a brilliant, searing blue. The other was a deep, consuming crimson. Positive and negative, he instinctively knew their ratio had to be perfect. 80-20. The energies swirled, rotating at impossible speeds, compressing into a single point of unimaginable density in his palm. A small, perfect sphere of night-black energy, no bigger than a baseball, materialized in his hand. It did not radiate light or heat. It seemed to consume it. A thin, violet aura crackled around it, the only indication of the power contained within. The automaton charged, its metallic legs gouging deep furrows in the bronze floor. The whining in its chest reached a fever pitch. Percy didn't even brace himself. He flicked his wrist. There was no sound, no thunderous boom, no satisfying crunch. There was only a sudden, shocking absence. The black sphere shot forward, not with the speed of an arrow, but with the instantaneous finality of a thought. It didn't collide with the automaton. It simply touched it, and the automaton ceased to exist. One moment, a 10-foot, multi-ton machine of celestial bronze was charging forward. The next, there was nothing. No wreckage, no smoke, no scorch mark. Just empty space. The sphere itself vanished, having expended its energy on a single, perfect act of uncreation. The silence that followed was more profound than any explosion. The rhythmic pounding of the distant pistons seemed to have stopped. The rivers of molten gold seemed to flow less brightly. The very air in the forge felt thin, stripped bare. Hephaestus stared at the empty space, his jaw hanging open. His hammer, a tool that had forged the master bolts of Zeus, slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor. Poseidon lowered his trident, his face a mask of disbelief and a dawning, terrible awe. He looked from the empty spot where the automaton had been, to his son. Percy stood with his hand still slightly outstretched. The agony in his head was beginning to recede, replaced by a strange, humming clarity. The world was coming back into focus, but it wasn't the same world he had known his entire life. He blinked, and the sensation was like a lens snapping into place. The change was absolute. He could still see the physical forge, the stunned gods, his own hands. But it was all just a surface layer, a thin veneer over the true reality. He could now see the flow of energy, the life force, the chakra, in everything. He saw the brilliant, sea-green energy coursing through his father, a vast and powerful tide. He saw the fiery, orange-red power churning within Hephaestus, a contained volcano of creative and destructive force. He saw the latent energy in the metals, the hum of power in the dormant automatons, the very life force of Olympus thrumming beneath his feet. He looked at his own hands and saw a maelstrom, a swirling vortex of power so immense, so overwhelming, it made the gods look like flickering candles in comparison. It was a chaotic, beautiful, terrifying storm of every color imaginable, a nexus of all the energies he had just inherited. He slowly lifted his gaze to meet his father's. Poseidon flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement. But for a god who had faced Typhon and Kronos, it was as telling as a scream. Percy didn't understand why until he caught his reflection in the polished surface of a nearby shield. His left eye was no longer sea-green. It was a shocking, blood red, with 3 black comma-like marks, tomo, spinning slowly around the pupil. His right eye was even more terrifying. The sclera was the same crimson. But the iris was gone, replaced by a concentric pattern of purple ripples, spreading out from his pupil like a stone dropped in a still pond. And within those ripples, 9 black tomo, identical to the ones in his left eye, were arranged in 3 neat rows. The Sharingan, the Rinnegan, combined. The Rinne Sharingan. The book lay forgotten on the floor, its purpose served. The quiet of the forge was absolute. The boy who had come to lift boxes was gone, and in his place stood something new. Something ancient. Something that looked at the gods of Olympus not as masters of the universe but as intricate, fascinating patterns of energy he could now, with a single thought, unravel. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Anomaly of Olympus. The silence in the forge was a living thing. It pressed in on them. Heavy and absolute, a vacuum left where the automaton used to be. Hephaestus stared, his mouth still agape, his brilliant engineer's mind trying and failing to compute the physics of absolute erasure. Poseidon's face was pale, the jovial warmth gone, replaced by the profound and ancient gravity of the sea in the face of a tidal wave it could not control. He was looking at his son. But the recognition in his eyes was faltering. Percy stood in the center of that silence, the world a symphony of raw data he was only just beginning to comprehend. The agony in his head had subsided, leaving behind a crystalline, humming clarity. He saw the intricate weave of his father's life force, a majestic, swirling galaxy of sea-green and cerulean energy. He saw the compressed, volcanic core of Hephaestus, a fiery orange-red heart of creation and destruction. He even saw the faint, silvery threads of divine power woven into the very metal of the forge, a cosmic background radiation left by eons of godly work. It was too much. The sheer sensory input was overwhelming, a library of Alexandria's worth of information flooding him every second. He closed his eyes, trying to center himself, trying to find the familiar anchor of the sea in his soul. It was still there, a powerful, steady current, but it was now just a river flowing into an ocean. The new power within him was that ocean, vast, deep, and terrifyingly primordial. It felt less like something he possessed and more like something he was. What was that? Hephaestus finally stammered, his voice a harsh rasp. He took an involuntary step back, away from Percy. It was a gesture of pure, instinctual fear. The forge god, master of fire and metal, was afraid of what he had just witnessed. Percy. Poseidon's voice was low, cautious. He took a step forward, but hesitated. Your eyes. Percy opened them again, forcing himself to meet his father's gaze. He tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain? I touched a book and downloaded the history of a magical ninja world, and now I have the power of its creator god. They would think he had gone insane. Before he could even try, the air crackled with a familiar, oppressive energy. A column of white-hot lightning struck the center of the forge floor with a deafening thunderclap, leaving a circle of scorched, smoking bronze. When the light faded, Zeus stood there, his face a thundercloud of imperial rage, the master bolt crackling in his hand. He was flanked by Ares, whose eyes glowed with bloodlust, and Athena, whose gray eyes were narrowed. Already analyzing, calculating, assessing the threat, Zeus's gaze swept the room, taking in the stunned expressions of his brothers, the lingering ozone from Percy's attack, and the conspicuous absence of the 10-foot automaton he knew should be there. His eyes, burning with the fury of the storm, finally landed on Percy. And for the first time in his immortal life, Zeus felt a tremor of something other than absolute certainty. He saw Percy's eyes, the crimson wheel, the rippling purple, and the raw, untamed energy signature radiating from the boy. It was an energy he didn't recognize, a power that didn't belong to their world, and it was immense. What has happened here? Zeus's voice was not a question, but a command for the universe to arrange itself into an answer. Poseidon stepped forward, placing himself between his brother and his son. There was an incident, Zeus. An automaton malfunctioned. Percy. Stopped it. Stopped it. Ares scoffed, hefting a massive, serrated blade that appeared in his hand. Looks like he atomized it. I haven't felt a power surge like that since Typhon. What did you do, punk? Percy met the war god's glare. He saw the chaotic, jagged spikes of crimson energy that composed Ares's being, a messy, uncontrolled bonfire of rage and violence. It was powerful, yes, but it was unrefined. It was like watching a child splash in a puddle compared to the ocean roaring inside him. The new knowledge in his head supplied a dozen different ways he could dismantle the god before he could even blink. The thought was as casual and unsettling as swatting a fly. He forced it down. There was a book, Percy said, his voice steady, betraying none of the internal chaos. I touched it. Something changed. Zeus's eyes narrowed. The emergency council is convened. Now, he pointed a finger at Percy. You will come. You will explain. And you will be judged. With another crack of thunder, he was gone. Ares shot pay. RCY a look that promised pain and dismemberment before dissolving into a shimmer of heat. Athena lingered for a moment, her gaze analytical and unnervingly sharp. She looked at his eyes, then at the spot where the automaton had vanished. And a flicker of something, was it fear, or professional curiosity, crossed her face before she too disappeared. Poseidon turned to him, his expression deeply troubled. Percy, whatever this is, whatever you've done, let me do the talking. Do not provoke him. Percy simply nodded, the humming in his mind growing louder. He felt the summons from Zeus not as a sound, but as a psychic pull. A thread of golden energy latching onto his own. With a sigh, he let it pull him, the world dissolving and reforming around him in the grand, intimidating space of the Olympian throne room. The 12 massive thrones sat in their familiar U-shape, the gods already assembled. The air was thick with tension and raw power. But for Percy, it was an entirely new experience. He no longer saw just gods in magnificent human forms. He saw their true nature. Zeus was a raging star of white gold lightning, contained but constantly straining. Hera, beside him, was a cool, steady pillar of silver light. Her power coiled and patient. Apollo and Artemis were perfectly balanced contrasts, one a blazing sun of golden energy, the other a serene, focused moonbeam of silver. Demeter was a deep, nurturing green, laced with the brown of rich earth. Aphrodite was a pulsating, chaotic nebula of pink and red, feeding off the emotions in the room. Dionysus was a murky, swirling purple, his power muted and hazy. Hermes was a quicksilver blur, his energy zipping and darting like a hummingbird. And his father, Poseidon, was a deep, thrumming trench of oceanic blue, a comforting and familiar presence in this maelstrom of light. He could see their fear. It was a discordant static in their energy, a tightening of the brilliant light that composed them. They were afraid of him. The realization hit him not with pride, but with a profound sense of isolation. The son of Poseidon stands before the council, accused of wielding a dangerous and unknown power on Olympus, Zeus's voice boomed, shaking the very foundations of the hall. Hephaestus, report. The forge god, now on his throne, recounted the events, his voice strained. He described the malfunctioning automaton, the imminent explosion. And then, he faltered. He raised his hand, Hephaestus said, looking at Percy with a mixture of awe and terror. There was a small, black thing. A sphere. It hit the automaton, and it was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. There was nothing left. A wave of murmurs swept through the council. Apollo leaned forward, his golden eyes wide with curiosity. Artemis's hand rested on her silver bow, her expression grim. Poseidon, Zeus commanded, your son, your responsibility. Explain this. I cannot explain what I do not understand, brother, Poseidon said, his voice a low rumble. Percy has always been powerful, but this is new. He mentioned a book. All eyes turned back to Percy. He stood in the center of the room, feeling like a specimen under a divine microscope. The power thrumming under his skin felt calm, responsive, waiting for his command. The knowledge in his head offered him 1,000 solutions, 1,000 ways to end this confrontation. He could trap them all in an illusion, teleport away, or simply overpower them. But that wasn't him. He was still Percy Jackson. He just had more tools at his disposal now. The book had a symbol on it, Percy said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. A spiral with 9 lobes. When I touched it, I learned things. Athena leaned forward, her gray eyes piercing. What things? The history of another world. Another system of power. It's called chakra. He said the word, and felt a resonant hum within himself. The book didn't give me this power. It just unlocked it. It feels like it was always there, sleeping. Sleeping. Ares roared, slamming his fist on the arm of his throne. That blast could have leveled this mountain. That's not sleeping, that's a monster waking up. He's a threat, a weapon we don't control. He is my son, Poseidon thundered, rising from his throne, the sea green light around him flaring. And he is an anomaly. Zeus shot back, the master bolt crackling ominously. A power that is not of our world has manifested within our walls. It is a threat to the divine order. To all of us. Zeus rose from his throne, his form crackling with electrical power. He was an avatar of the storm, the absolute ruler of Olympus, and his authority was being challenged by the very existence of the boy before him. He needed to re-establish dominance. You will be contained, Zeus declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. Your power will be bound until we can understand it. And if we cannot understand it, we will extinguish it. He raised the master bolt, but he didn't throw it. Instead, he pointed a single finger at Percy. A thin, controlled bolt of lightning, no thicker than a spear shaft but humming with terrifying power, shot from his fingertip. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to incapacitate, to put Percy down and remind him of his place. Time seemed to slow. Percy saw the bolt of lightning not as a single, blinding flash, but as a river of pure energy. He saw how it was constructed, how Zeus had woven the power of the sky into a weapon. The memories of Kagaya, of the god tree, of the sage of 6 paths, provided him with an answer so simple, so fundamental. It was almost laughable. He didn't summon water. He didn't draw a riptide. He didn't even move from his spot. He simply raised his right hand, palm forward. A black, viscous substance flowed from his palm, instantly coalescing into a sphere about the size of a grapefruit. It wasn't solid, liquid, or gas, but something else entirely, a malleable piece of pure potential. It hovered before his hand, silent and absolute, a truth-seeking orb, Zeus's lightning bolt, the symbol of his power, the weapon that had defeated the Titans, struck the orb and was absorbed. There was no explosion, no sizzle, no flash of light. The river of divine energy simply flowed into the black sphere and vanished. The orb didn't even vibrate. It just floated there, placid and unassuming, having effortlessly nullified the power of the king of the gods. The silence that followed was a physical blow. The crackling energy around Zeus died. The bloodlust in Ares's eyes was replaced by stark disbelief. Apollo's jaw hung open. Even Athena looked utterly, completely stunned. They had just witnessed the impossible. Their power, the very definition of reality as they knew it, had been treated like a minor inconvenience. Percy let the orb dissolve back into his palm. He lowered his hand, his expression calm. He hadn't meant it as an act of defiance, but one of simple self-preservation. In doing so, he had shattered the foundational pillar of Olympian power. As I said, Athena's voice cut through the stunned silence, soft but clear. He is an unknown. To act rashly, to try and destroy a power you cannot comprehend, is the height of folly. We know it can destroy. We now know it can defend against our strongest attacks. What else can it do? Her gaze flickered to Percy, a flicker of academic hunger in her eyes. We must study him. Study him. He should be cast into Tartarus. Ares bellowed, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. And what if he simply walks out? Artemis countered, her voice cool and logical. We cannot risk that. The council was broken. The old lines of power and authority were fractured. Zeus looked at Percy, his rage warring with a cold, unfamiliar spike of fear. He was the king, but for the first time, he was faced with a subject whose power might be beyond his rule. The debate raged, but it was hollow. The real argument had already been won in that single, silent moment of absorption. In the end, a tense compromise was reached. Percy would not be imprisoned, but he would not be free. He was to remain on Olympus, under guard and observation, until the council could decide his fate. He was escorted by two silent automatons to a lavish guest suite, a gilded cage with a view of the Olympian gardens. The moment the doors closed, Annabeth was there. She must have Iris messaged her way past the guards the second she heard. Her face was pale, her gray eyes wide with worry. Percy, they told me there was an accident. Are you all right? What happened? She rushed forward, her hands coming up to cup his face. And then she froze. She was looking into his eyes. Her breath hitched, and her hands trembled slightly. She took a half step back, her analytical mind trying to process the impossible data before her. The spinning red wheel, the purple ripples. Your eyes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Annabeth, he started, but the words failed him. How could he bridge this chasm? How could he explain the universe that was now living inside his head? He was the same person, but everything that defined him had been rewritten. They said you destroyed something. They said you fought Zeus, she said, her voice laced with a fear he had never heard from her before. It wasn't the fear of an impending monster attack, it was a deeper, more personal terror, the fear of the unknown. I didn't fight him, Percy said softly. I just stopped him from hurting me. She searched his face, looking for the boy she knew, the goofy, loyal, reckless son of Poseidon. He was still there, but there was a new stillness about him, a frightening depth. The weight of his new power was a tangible presence in the room. He saw the fear in her, in the subtle tightening of her energy, a flicker in her life force. He wanted to erase it, to reassure her, to show her that he was still him. Words were failing him, so he tried to show her. He gently took her hand. It was trembling. I know this is scary, he said. But it's not all destruction. He focused, drawing on a different aspect of the knowledge, a different facet of the immense power. Not the power to destroy, but its opposite. The creation of all things. He imagined a seed, a spark of life, drawing energy from his own vast reserves and giving it form, infusing it with purpose. A soft, white light bloomed in his palm, cupped around hers. It faded to reveal a single, perfect flower resting on her skin. It was a night-blooming jasmine, its petals a delicate, almost translucent white. It hadn't just appeared, it had been created. Its scent filled the room, more vibrant, more real than any flower that had ever grown from the earth. It was the platonic ideal of a flower, born not of soil and water, but of pure thought and energy. He looked up at her, hoping to see relief, understanding. What he saw was a new, deeper wave of fear. Her eyes were fixed on the flower, her face ashen. This, more than the story of him vaporizing an automaton, more than him neutralizing the power of Zeus, terrified her. The power of destruction was something demigods understood. But the power to create life from nothing, that was the domain of the primordial gods, the very definition of divinity. He had just done it with the ease of a sigh. She slowly pulled her hand back, the flower falling to the marble floor. "What are you, Percy?" she whispered, and the distance between them felt wider than the entire world. Far beyond Olympus, beyond the sky and the earth, in the silent, eternal space that predated creation, something stirred. There was no light, no sound, no matter. There was only darkness. Erebus. He was not a being of flesh and bone, but a consciousness, a sentient void. For eons, his existence had been a placid one, a perfect equilibrium of nothingness. He felt the dim lights of the gods and their creations, faint and distant stars in his infinite night. But they were part of the balance. They were born, they flared, they faded. But today, a new light had been born. He felt it as a physical intrusion, a violent, piercing star that had appeared out of nowhere. It was not like the others. It was brighter, hotter, and it pulsed with an energy that was fundamentally alien. It was a light that contained its own darkness, a power that held the seed of both creation and destruction in perfect, terrifying balance. It was a violation of the natural order. It was a threat to the beautiful, perfect silence of his void. The Concio, USNESS that was Erebus focused its timeless, ancient will. This new light, this anomaly, had to be understood. And then, it had to be extinguished. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weight of Creation. Days in the gilded cage on Olympus were a strange, formless drift. Time, for Percy, had lost its familiar rhythm. He didn't need to sleep, the boundless energy of the 10 tails a self-sustaining furnace within him. He didn't need to eat, though he occasionally had nectar and ambrosia brought to him just to feel a semblance of normalcy. The suite was opulent, with balconies overlooking clouds that shimmered like mother of pearl and gardens where the flowers sang a soft, chromatic scale, but it was a prison nonetheless. 2 stoic automatons, forged from gleaming celestial bronze, stood guard at his door. Their glowing eyes a constant reminder of his status as Olympus's most prized and feared captive. He spent most of the time in a state of deep meditation, not for peace, but for control. The universe inside his head was still a chaotic storm. The memories of the shinobi world, 1,000 years of war, peace, love, and betrayal, were slowly integrating with his own. He was processing techniques he'd never learned, feeling the phantom burn of jutsu in his limbs, and understanding philosophies of power that made the squabbles of the Olympian gods seem petty and childish. His new vision was the most difficult adjustment. The Rinne Sharingan was not a tool he could simply turn off. It was his new reality. He saw everything, everywhere, as a tapestry of chakra. He could see the faint, fading life force of the singing flowers on his balcony. He could feel the anxious thrum of Hermes's energy as the god zipped across the world on his deliveries. He could sense the distant, rumbling core of his father's power deep within the Atlantic. He could even feel the subtle, interconnected network of life that flowed through the mortals on the planet below, a fragile, beautiful web of countless tiny lights. And he could see the flaw in divinity. The gods, for all their power, were inefficient. Their energy was immense but unfocused, like a raging bonfire. They burned hot and bright, but they wasted so much. Chakra, as the memories taught him, was about control, precision, and balance. The gods had none of it. They were raw power, shaped by belief and personality. He was something different. He was a system. The flower Annabeth had dropped lay on a marble table where he had placed it. It had not wilted. He could see the perfect, self-contained loop of energy he had woven into its creation. A tiny engine of life that would sustain it indefinitely. It was a testament to a power that frightened him as much as it did her. He hadn't seen her since that first day. She couldn't get past the guards, and he knew, on a deeper level, that she was also afraid to try. He could feel her energy signature from a distance, a sharp, brilliant silver gray, currently frayed with worry and intellectual frustration. She was in the Olympian library, no doubt, tearing through every scroll she could find for an answer, for a precedent, for a box to put him in. He knew she wouldn't find one. He was experimenting. The knowledge of the 6 paths was instinctual. He learned he could exert a universal gravitational force, to push and pull objects without touching them. He discovered he could absorb energy attacks, rendering them moot. He could summon creatures that were not of this world, bizarre, multi-headed beasts born from the Rinnegan's power, though he dismissed them as soon as they appeared. Unsettled by their alien wrongness, he could even read the minds of his guards, seeing their simple, loyal command loops, and peer into their souls. But the most profound and disturbing power was the one that lay at the intersection of life and death. He knew, with an unnerving certainty, that he could restore a soul to its body, to resurrect the dead. The thought was so terrifying, so fundamentally wrong, that he walled it off in his mind, vowing never to touch it. This was his new existence, an eternity of quiet contemplation, of exploring the god-like powers that had alienated him from everyone he loved. It was lonely. It was the loneliness of a Jinchuriki, a feeling he now understood with painful, first-hand clarity. The first sign that something was wrong in the mortal world came not as a message, but as a change in the tapestry. He was gazing down at the faint web of human life when he noticed it, a patch of lights in the area of Long Island Sound that were dimming, fading, like candles sputtering in a breeze. The sensation was faint at first, but it grew stronger, a subtle, sickly drain on the ambient life force of the area. It was centered on one specific location, a place that shone brighter to his senses than any other, Camp Half-Blood. A cold dread washed over him. He focused his attention, pushing his senses, peering through the miles of cloud and sky. He saw the camp, not with his eyes, but with his mind. He saw the energy of the place, the vibrant, chaotic thrum of hundreds of demigods. But it was sick. A creeping, gray, parasitic energy was spreading through it, latching onto the campers, draining them. Just as the realization solidified, a frantic, shimmering image appeared in the air before him, an iris message. It was Will Solace. His face was pale and drawn, his blonde hair matted with sweat. He was in the camp infirmary, and behind him, Percy could see cots filled with demigods, all of them looking pale and listless, their skin taking on a grayish pallor. Percy. Will's voice was strained, panicked. "Can you hear me? We need help." "Will, what is it? What's happening?" Percy asked, his voice low and urgent. "We don't know," Will said, running a hand through his hair. "It started 2 days ago. A few campers felt tired. Now we have almost 50 in here. They're just fading. They're not dying. Their heartbeats are steady, but they're getting weaker. Their life force, it's like something is siphoning it away. We've tried everything. Nectar, ambrosia, healing songs, even a direct prayer to my father. Nothing works. It's like their bodies have forgotten how to hold on to life." Percy could see it now, clear as day. The gray, parasitic energy was clinging to the life force of the demigods like a leech, slowly and methodically draining it away. It wasn't a poison or a disease in the mortal sense. It was a spiritual affliction, a curse designed to attack the very essence of a soul. Apollo's light, for all its healing power, was like trying to patch a hole in a bucket while the water was still draining out. It couldn't fix the source of the leak. Chiron sent a message to Olympus hours ago, Will continued, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "We haven't heard anything back. People are getting scared, Percy. We're losing them." The connection flickered and died. Percy stood in his silent, luxurious prison, the frantic plea of his friend echoing in the air. He knew why Olympus hadn't responded. To them, a few dozen dying demigods was a tragedy, perhaps, but it was not an existential threat. It was a problem to be studied, debated, and assigned. But to Percy, it was a fire tearing through his home. He turned to the golden doors of his suite. He could feel the simple, unwavering energy of the automatons on the other side. He could sense the intricate magical wards woven into the frame. He could also sense at least 5 different ways to bypass them all without making a sound. He walked to the door. He didn't try the handle. He simply placed his palm flat against the cool, divine metal. A faint purple ripple spread from his hand, and for a single, silent moment, the section of the door he was touching became intangible. He simply stepped through it, the metal reforming behind him as if it had never been disturbed. The two automatons swiveled their heads, their glowing eyes fixing on him. Their internal command loops flashed red with alarm. Alarm. Prisoner has breached containment. Initiate subdual protocols. Before they could even raise their weapons, Percy looked at them, his Rene Sharingan flaring. He didn't use a powerful illusion. He simply projected a single, gentle thought directly into their core programming. Everything is fine. I am still in my room. All is secure. The red light in their eyes faded back to a placid blue. They returned to their guard positions, completely unaware that their prisoner was now standing behind them. He felt a pang of guilt at the violation, but it was quickly washed away by the urgency of the crisis. He was done waiting for the gods to act. He closed his eyes and focused on the energy signature of Camp Half-Blood. The knowledge from the book supplied the technique. Kamui. The space before him began to warp, twisting into a swirling vortex. He stepped into it without hesitation, the world dissolving around him as he was pulled through a dimension of his own creation. The transition was instantaneous. One moment he was in a golden corridor on Olympus, the next he was standing in the middle of the camp Half-Blood Green. Air was heavy with fear and the sickly sweet smell of wilting magic. He could see it everywhere now, the creeping gray tendrils of the plague, coiling around the cabins, draining the life from the strawberry fields. And clinging to the very air the campers breathed. He ran for the infirmary. The scene inside was worse than the Iris message had shown. The big house's rec room had been converted into a makeshift hospital ward. Every cot, bed, and sofa filled with a pale, listless demigod. Will Solace and a handful of other Apollo campers were moving between them, their faces grim with the exhaustion of healers who could not heal. The air was thick with the scent of crushed herbs and despair. When Percy walked in, a hush fell over the room. Will looked up, his eyes widening first with relief, then with a jolt of shock as he saw Percy's eyes. Percy, how did you? Doesn't matter. Percy cut him off, his gaze sweeping the room. He saw his friends, his family, lying helpless. Katie Gardner from the Demeter cabin. Connor Stoll from Hermes, a dozen kids from the Ares cabin who usually radiated obnoxious levels of energy, now lay as still as statues. He could see the affliction clearly now. The gray, leech-like energy was latched onto the core of their being, their spiritual heart, and was slowly, inexorably drinking them dry. He walked to the nearest cot, where a young daughter of Hecate, no older than 12, lay breathing in shallow rasps. He could see her life force, once a vibrant violet, now a faint, flickering ember, cocooned in the hungry gray mist. What is this? Annabeth's voice came from behind him. He turned. She stood in the doorway, Chiron at her side. She must have come running from the library when she heard he'd arrived. Her face was a mixture of relief, terror, and awe. Chiron's ancient eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. It's a curse, Percy said, not taking his eyes off the girl. It's not attacking their bodies. It's attacking their souls. It's designed to unmake them from the inside out. Can you stop it? Chiron asked, his voice a low rumble. Percy looked at the dying embers of the demigods around him. He could feel their life slipping away. He knew, with absolute certainty, what he had to do. The knowledge was there, waiting. The creation of all things. It wasn't just for making flowers. It was the power to breathe life into form. To shape reality from pure imagination and energy. He could heal them. He could rebuild their life force, purge the curse, and restore what was being stolen. But he remembered the fear in Annabeth's eyes when he created the flower. This was 1,000 times more profound. To do this was to step over a line, to wield a power that no demigod, no god, was ever meant to have. It was an act of ultimate creation, of playing God in the most literal sense. He looked at the dying girl. He saw his own mortality in her fading light. He saw the faces of all the friends he had lost. He had the power to stop this. The choice was not a choice at all. Everyone stand back, he said, his voice quiet but resonant with authority. He knelt beside the girl's cot. He placed one hand on her forehead and the other over her heart. He closed his eyes and reached inward, not for the power of the sea, but for the vast, infinite ocean of chakra within him. He drew on it, molding it, shaping it with his will. He imagined her life force as it should be, a strong, vibrant, violet flame. He imagined it burning away the gray leech, pushing it out, obliterating it. He channeled the power through his hands. It was the most intricate, delicate work he had ever done. It wasn't a blast of energy. It was a careful, cellular-level reknitting of her spiritual DNA. He was not just healing her, he was remaking her. He poured a piece of his own life force into her, a seed of his immense power, to serve as a foundation upon which to rebuild her own. Under his hands, the girl's skin began to regain its color. The grayish pallor receded, replaced by a healthy, warm glow. Her breathing deepened, becoming steady and strong. The faint violet ember of her life force, nurtured by his own, erupted into a healthy, roaring flame, incinerating the parasitic gray energy that had clung to it. He opened his eyes. The girl's eyes fluttered open. They were no longer dull and listless. They were bright, clear, and focused directly on him. A look of pure, unadulterated adoration filled her face. "My lord," she whispered, her voice filled with a reverence that chilled him to the bone. Percy pulled his hands back as if he'd been burned. He stumbled to his feet, staring at the girl. She sat up, looking healthier than she had probably ever been. But the way she looked at him, it was wrong. It was the look of a worshipper before their god. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had left an indelible imprint of his own power on her soul. He had not just healed her, he had bound her to him on a fundamental level. A gasp went through the room. Annabeth's hand was over her mouth, her eyes wide with horrified understanding. Chiron's face was a mask of grim realization. Percy didn't have time to process it. He looked at the other fading demigods. He had started this. He had to finish it. He moved from cot to cot, a grim, silent angel of life. He touched each demigod, performing the same intricate, terrifying act of creation. He rebuilt them, remade them, poured a spark of his own essence into each of them. And one by one, they awoke. Connor Stoll, Katie Gardner, Sherman Young from the Ares cabin. They all sat up, their bodies filled with a new, vibrant life. And they all looked at him with the same unnerving, absolute devotion. They didn't cheer. They didn't thank him. They simply watched him with the quiet, unwavering loyalty of a soldier for their king, of a disciple for their Messiah. When he was done, the infirmary was silent. 50 demigods, saved from the brink of oblivion, now sat on their cots. Their collective gaze fixed on him. They were his, not by choice, but by the very nature of their new existence. He had saved their lives and, in the process, stolen a piece of their freedom. The weight of that choice settled on him, heavier than the sky. Suddenly, the air outside crackled with divine energy. A flash of gold, and Hermes stood on the porch of the big house, his face grim. His caduceus was held not like a messenger's staff, but like a weapon. Perseus Jackson, Hermes's voice was sharp, all traces of his usual laid-back attitude gone. By order of Zeus, you are to cease this gross violation of natural law and return to Olympus at once. You have defied the council. There will be consequences. Percy walked out of the infirmary, into the sunlight. The 50 healed demigods followed him, moving in a silent, coordinated mass. They formed a loose semicircle behind him, their eyes never leaving him, a silent, devoted army. Percy faced the god of messengers. He saw the quicksilver energy that made up Hermes, the frantic, buzzing power of speed. It was impressive, but to his Rene Sharingan, it was just a blur moving along predictable lines. I'm not going back, Hermes, Percy said, his voice calm. My friends were dying. Your king did nothing. I did what a god should have done. Hermes's jaw tightened. You don't know what you've done. To create life, to reforge a soul, that is not your right. It is an abomination. You have upset a balance you cannot possibly comprehend. The only balance I care about is the one between my friends living and dying, Percy retorted. This is your last chance, Percy, Hermes said, his body beginning to vibrate, blurring at the edges as he prepared to move at divine speed. Come back with me now, and Zeus might show mercy. Percy shook his head. Tell Zeus to stay out of my way. That was it. The line was crossed. In a blink, Hermes was gone. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. He moved faster than light, his plan to strike Percy 1,000 times before he could even register the first blow. It was a tactic that would have overwhelmed any god or titan. But Percy didn't need to be faster. His eyes saw it all. He saw the golden trail of Hermes's energy, the intended path of his attack. He saw the future, written in the language of chakra, a fraction of a second before it happened. Hermes appeared at his right, his fist cocked, the force of his blow enough to shatter a mountain. Percy didn't even turn to look. He raised his left hand. Shinra Tensai. He didn't shout the words. He barely whispered them. An invisible, omnidirectional wave of gravitational force erupted from his body. It wasn't an attack. It was a fundamental rejection of the physical world around him. Hermes, moving at impossible speed, slammed into this invisible wall of force. His momentum, his greatest weapon, became his undoing. He was repelled, thrown backward. With the same cataclysmic force he had intended to deliver. He flew through the air, a golden comet, and crashed into the side of the Athena cabin with a sound like a thunderclap, splintering the marble walls. He slumped to the ground, groaning, the divine energy around him flickering erratically. He was stunned, disoriented, his perfect speed utterly and effortlessly negated. Percy hadn't moved a muscle. He stood in the same spot, his 50 loyal followers standing silently behind him. Annabeth and Chiron watched from the porch, their faces pale with shock. "Go back to Olympus," Percy said, his voice carrying across the green. Devoid of anger or malice. It was the voice of calm, absolute certainty. "Tell the council this camp is under my protection now. Tell them that their authority here is subject to my approval. Tell them that if they want a war, they're welcome to try." Hermes pushed himself to his feet, clutching his shoulder. He looked at Percy, not with anger, but with a dawning, horrified understanding. This wasn't a rebellious demigod anymore. This was a new power, a new king, declaring his sovereignty. With a final, worried look, he vanished in a flash of gold. Percy stood in the sudden silence, the weight of his actions settling in. He had defied the gods, assaulted one of them, and claimed his home as his own sovereign territory. He had saved 50 lives by twisting their souls into an unnatural shape of loyalty to him. He felt the coldness then, a faint touch in the back of his mind. A silent, ancient observer from a realm of pure darkness. And he felt a flicker of what could only be described as approval. The chaos he was sowing, the order he was shattering, it pleased the shadow. Annabeth walked slowly down the steps of the porch, her gray eyes wide and filled with 1,000 questions he had no answers for. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze flickering from his terrifying eyes to the silent, devoted army at his back. "Percy," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "What have you done?" Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Dark. The silence that followed Hermes's departure was more profound than any battle cry. It was a silence of shifted paradigms, of a line drawn in the ancient soil of Camp Half-Blood that could never be erased. Percy stood on the green, the afternoon sun casting his long shadow over the grass. He was no longer just a camper, a hero, a son of Poseidon. He was an occupying force, a sovereign power, a king in a kingdom he had never intended to rule. Behind him, the 50 demigods he had saved, the tethered, as a cold, analytical part of his mind had labeled them, stood with an unnerving, placid stillness. They weren't menacing. They weren't even consciously threatening. They simply were, a living testament to the terrifying nature of his power. One of them, a daughter of Demeter, knelt and carefully picked up a splintered piece of marble from the damaged Athena cabin, holding it as if it were a sacred relic. The simple, mindless act was more chilling than any threat. Annabeth and Chiron approached slowly, their expressions a mixture of awe and profound trepidation. Chiron's gait was heavy, the weight of centuries pressing down on him. He had seen heroes rise and fall, seen the hubris of gods and men play out in tragic cycles. He was looking at Percy now with the weary eyes of a historian watching the first chapter of a new, and possibly catastrophic, epic being written. "What have I done?" Percy repeated her question, his voice low, directed at himself more than at her. "I saved them. You dominated them," Annabeth countered, her voice sharp but trembling. She stopped a few feet from him, unwilling to get closer, unwilling to enter the orbit of the silent, devoted demigods at his back. Her gray eyes, usually so full of fierce intelligence and affection, were now guarded, analytical. She was looking at a problem she didn't know how to solve. Look at them, Percy. They're not just grateful, they're empty. Their will is yours. That's not healing. It's a violation. The alternative was letting them die. He shot back, a flicker of his old defensiveness rising. Zeus wasn't coming. Apollo couldn't help. They were fading away. Was I supposed to stand by and watch because the solution was unnatural? There are lines that must not be crossed, Chiron said, his voice a deep, sorrowful rumble. The power over a soul, to rewrite its very essence, this is the power of the primordials. Of the fates themselves. To wield it is to invite consequences that can unravel the fabric of the world. The world is already unraveling, Percy said, gesturing vaguely at the camp around them. We've spent our entire lives fighting to save a world run by gods who are too busy with their own squabbles to protect their own children. I stopped a plague they ignored and deflected a god they sent to punish me for it. Don't talk to me about crossing lines. I think the gods crossed it first. His words hung in the air, heavy and treasonous. He had never spoken like that before, with such cold, final authority. The sea green of his natural eye seemed darker, and the swirling red and purple of his new eyes seemed to burn with a chilling, ancient light. Annabeth flinched as if he'd slapped her. That isn't you talking, Percy. It's the only me there is now, he said, the truth of it landing like a stone in his own gut. He turned away from them, unable to bear the fear and condemnation in their eyes. He walked towards the sound, the tethered following him at a respectful distance, their footsteps a soft, synchronized rhythm on the grass. He needed the sea. He needed to feel something familiar, something that rooted him to the person he used to be. He stood on the beach, the gentle waves lapping at the sand. He reached out with his senses, seeking the familiar, comforting embrace of his father's domain. It was there, but it felt distant, muted, like listening to his favorite song through a thick wall of glass. The power of the 10 tails was so overwhelming, so absolute, it was insulating him from his own past, his own heritage. He was an island, and the tide was receding from his shores. That was when the whisper came. It wasn't a sound, it was a thought, an idea, that bloomed in the center of his mind, dark and fully formed. It was a voice that was not a voice, ancient and cold and vast. New. The thought was simple, curious, like a geologist examining a strange new mineral. Bright. You burn so brightly. Percy's head snapped up. He scanned the horizon, his Rene Sharingan piercing through the veil of the physical world, seeing the flows of energy, the life force of the fish in the water, the ancient power of the sea itself. But this was something else. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It was a presence that was defined only by its absolute absence of light and life. Who's there? He projected, not with his voice, but with his will. I am the silence between the stars. The voice answered, its tone devoid of emotion. I am the darkness in the deep. I am the truth that remains when all the fleeting lights of creation have faded. I am Erebus. The name settled in Percy's mind, heavy with primordial weight. Erebus, the incarnation of darkness. He wasn't on Olympus. He wasn't a god who sat on a throne. He was a fundamental constant of the universe. You have caused a great disruption, little star, Erebus continued, the thought voice calm and patient. You wield the power of Genesis and Apocalypse with the carelessness of a child. You heal, and you enslave. You defend, and you conquer. Every action you take to create order only deepens the chaos. I'm protecting my home, Percy projected back, his mental voice a defiant growl. You have turned your home into a fortress, and its people into puppets. You have made yourself a king, and in doing so, you have declared war on the very gods who made you. You believe you are a beacon, but a new light casts a new and longer shadow. Balance has been broken. The words were insidious because they were true. Erebus wasn't threatening him. He was simply holding up a mirror to the doubts already festering in Percy's soul. He was articulating the horror Annabeth had looked at him with. What do you want? Percy demanded. Want. I am the void. I do not want. I simply am. And you are an imbalance. An equation that must be solved. A light that must be adjusted. Ponder this, little star. The brighter you burn, the more you will feed the darkness. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the presence was gone. The cold spot in the back of his mind vanished, leaving only a lingering chill and the echo of its poisonous truth. Percy stood on the shore, the waves hissing at his feet. Feeling more alone than ever before. He had an enemy now. Not a monster to be slain or a god to be outwitted, but a conceptual force, a cosmic entity that saw his very existence as a mistake. The throne room of Olympus was a study in controlled chaos. Hermes had returned, not just beaten, but utterly humiliated. He recounted the event with a new, grudging respect in his voice, cribbing the invisible wall of force that had swatted him from the air like a fly. The gods were in an uproar. Ares was on his feet, bellowing for a full-scale assault, demanding they level the entire camp and salt the earth. Hera argued for sanctions, for cutting the camp off from all divine contact, to let it wither and die. Demeter was simply weeping over the desecration of her strawberries. Enough. Zeus's roar was a physical blast of thunder that shook the thrones. He stood, the master bolt in his hand, his face carved from granite. His authority had been flouted, his messenger assaulted, and his power base on earth openly seized by a demigod. This could not stand. This is not a rebellion. This is a schism. Jackson has created his own pantheon, with himself as its sole god. He cannot be reasoned with. He cannot be intimidated. He must be neutralized. His gaze fell upon Hephaestus. The forge god shifted uncomfortably on his massive, mechanical throne. You have seen his power firsthand, my son, Zeus said. His voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You understand what we are facing. I commanded you to begin work on a failsafe. A weapon. What is its status? Hephaestus sighed, the sound of grinding metal. It is theoretical, my lord. The energy he wields, it doesn't obey the laws of our universe. It both creates and destroys. To bind it would require a matrix forged from concepts, not just metals. A chain made of absolute law. A lock made from a paradox. Then forge it. Zeus thundered. Use whatever you must. Celestial bronze, imperial gold, the heart of a dying star, a sliver of my own bolt. I want a weapon that can contain him, Hephaestus. Not to kill him. His power is too volatile to be released in such an uncontrolled way, but to seal him. To put him in a cage from which he can never, ever escape. Do you understand me? Hephaestus looked at his king, at the desperate fury in his eyes, and then at Poseidon, who sat silently on his throne, his face a mask of sorrow. His oceanic power coiled tightly, defensively, around himself. The forge god gave a slow, reluctant nod. I understand, my lord. Zeus turned his stormy gaze towards the image of the earth that floated in the center of the room. He wants to be a king. Then he will learn the loneliness of a crown. Let him have his little fortress. Let him see how long he can protect it from a world that is much, much larger than his camp. The boy has made his move. Now, we will make ours. Percy felt the attack begin as a sudden, sickening darkening of the web. He was in the big house with Annabeth and Chiron, trying to explain the encounter with Erebus, when he staggered, his hand flying to his temple. Percy. Annabeth rushed to his side. Something's wrong, he gasped, his Renee Sheringan seeing it clearly. A city. Boston. The life force, it's being erased. He focused his senses, pushing them north. He saw a gaping, spreading hole being torn in the fabric of mortal life. It wasn't an explosion or a monster attack in the traditional sense. It was a creeping, silent plague of nothingness. He knew, with chilling certainty, that this was Erebus's next move. He wasn't attacking Percy directly. He was attacking the world Percy had sworn to protect, forcing him to act, to prove his point. I have to go, Percy said, straightening up. You can't, Annabeth argued, grabbing his arm. Percy, this is a trap. He's trying to draw you out, to make you show your power, to further isolate you. There are millions of people in that city, Annabeth, he said, his voice grim. If I don't go, who will? He looked at her, and she saw the terrible weight in his eyes. The reluctant king being forced to defend his realm. She saw that she couldn't stop him, so she did the only thing she could. She nodded. Then I'm going with you. It's too dangerous. You're too dangerous to go alone, she shot back, her strategist's mind already clicking into place. You're the power. I'm the plan. You need me. He saw the logic in her words, and felt a profound wave of gratitude. Even now, terrified as she would not let him face this alone. He gave her a sharp nod. He placed a hand on her shoulder, the space around them twisting into the familiar swirling vortex of his kamui. They stepped through together, leaving a stunned Chiron alone in the big house. They materialized in a Boston alleyway, and the wrongness of the place hit them like a physical blow. It wasn't just dark, it was a profound and absolute absence. The usual city hum of traffic, sirens, and life was gone, replaced by a dead, oppressive silence. The air was cold, devoid of all warmth. A street lamp at the end of the alley flickered and went out, its light not just disappearing, but seeming to be devoured. Peeking out onto the street, they saw the cause. Shadowy, vaguely humanoid figures drifted through the streets. They had no features, no substance. They were holes in reality, patches of mobile void that consumed everything they touched. A car they passed didn't just stop. Its color faded to gray, its engine went silent, and a fine layer of frost bloomed on its windshield. They were nyctivores, night eaters. Worse were the people. Mortals stood frozen on the sidewalks, their faces blank, their eyes wide and empty. Their life force, their warmth, their very color was being leached away, drawn into the passing shades. It was the same affliction that had struck the camp, but on a massive, terrifying scale. They're not just creatures of darkness, Percy murmured, his eyes seeing the energy exchange. They're entropy given form. They feed on everything. Light, heat, sound, life. Can you fight them? Annabeth asked, her hand gripping the hilt of her Dracon bone sword. Let's find out. Percy stepped out of the alley. He raised a hand, and a black receiver rod, a tool to channel his chakra, materialized in his grip. He pointed it at the nearest nyctivore. Bansho Tenon. A powerful gravitational force erupted from the rod, pulling the shade towards him. But instead of being ripped apart, the creature simply dissolved into the pull, its essence vanishing. Worse, Percy felt a faint, chilling drain on his own power. The attack had worked, but it had cost him. He couldn't destroy them. They were just absorbing his power. He changed tactics. He formed a small, compressed sphere of energy in his palm. A miniature-tailed beast bomb, and fired it. The sphere hit a cluster of 3 nyctivores and detonated in a silent flash of violet light, erasing them from existence. But the void they left behind felt colder, deeper. He had used a weapon of annihilation to fight annihilation, and had only succeeded in creating a more perfect nothingness. Erebus's words echoed in his mind. The brighter you burn, the more you will feed the darkness. It's not working, he said, gritting his teeth. Fighting them on their own terms is a losing battle. Then don't, Annabeth said, her eyes scanning the street, the frozen people, the silent, drifting shades. He sent creatures of absolute despair and apathy. Percy, you can't fight a concept with force. You have to fight it with its opposite. Her words hit him with the force of a revelation. She was right. He had been thinking like a warrior, a demigod. He needed to think like the god he was becoming. He couldn't destroy the darkness. He had to replace it. He looked at Annabeth, a new plan forming in his mind, a terrifying, audacious plan. Stay behind me, he said, his voice filled with a new resolve. He walked to the center of the street, closed his eyes, and let the black receiver rod dissolve. He held his hands out to his sides, palms up. He didn't draw on the destructive aspect of his power. He reached for the other side of the coin. The creation of all things. But not to make a flower. Not to remake a single soul. He was going to use it to broadcast an idea. A feeling. He reached deep into himself. Past the memories of war and pain, and found the core of who he was. He found his loyalty to his friends. He found his love for Annabeth. He found the memory of his mother's smile, the taste of her blue cookies. The feeling of the waves on a sunny day at Montauk. He gathered every positive, life-affirming emotion he had, every spark of hope, every ounce of courage. He began to channel it, molding his chakra not into a weapon, but into a wave. A gentle, pervasive wave of pure life energy. It began as a soft, golden light that emanated from his body. The light spread, flowing down the street, washing over the frozen cars and silent buildings. It wasn't hot or blinding. It was warm, like the first sun on your face after a long winter. The Nyctivores recoiled from the light, their shadowy forms sizzling as if touched by acid. They were beings of pure apathy. The raw, concentrated emotion of hope was anathema to them. The golden light swept over the frozen mortals. It touched their skin, flowed into their minds, and reignited the dying embers of their souls. A woman's blank face regained its color. A man who had been staring into nothingness blinked, looking around in confusion. All over the city, the catatonic victims of the Nyctivores began to stir, waking as if from a terrible, cold dream. They wouldn't remember what had happened, only that a profound dread had suddenly and inexplicably lifted. Percy pushed the wave further, blanketing the entire city in his golden, hopeful light. The Nyctivores, unable to feed, unable to even exist in such a vibrant, life-filled atmosphere, simply evaporated. Dissolving like smoke in the wind. The silence was replaced by the returning hum of the city, the oppressive cold replaced by a gentle warmth. It was over. He had saved them. He lowered his hands, the golden light receding back into him. The effort had been immense, a vast expenditure of spiritual energy. He felt a deep, profound exhaustion, not in his body, but in his soul. He had just poured his own emotions out to cover an entire city. Annabeth rushed to his side, her face a mask of awe. "Percy, you did it." He nodded, leaning on her for support. "I did." He had won. He had beaten Erebus's attack and saved millions of lives without throwing a single punch. But as he looked out over the waking, confused city, a chilling realization dawned on him. He had just single-handedly solved a problem that would have baffled the entire Olympian Council. He had acted as a global protector, a benevolent, God-level force, answering a crisis that no one else could. He had proven Erebus right. His very existence had changed the rules of the world. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. He was now the sole defense against a new and terrifying class of threat. The victory didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like a life sentence. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Crossroads of Fate. The return to Camp Half-Blood was silent. One moment they were standing in a Boston alley, the hum of a restored city life rising around them. The next, they were on the familiar grass of the green, the scent of strawberries and sea salt in the air. The transition was seamless, a testament to Percy's growing mastery over the impossible, but the sense of whiplash was profound. He felt hollowed out, as if he'd poured the very essence of his soul into the Saint Reeds of Boston and had come back an empty vessel. The 50 tethered demigods were waiting. They stood in a loose, silent formation near the big house, their faces turned towards the spot where he appeared. They didn't rush forward. They didn't cheer. They simply watched, their expressions a placid, unnerving mix of reverence and contentment. Their king had returned from a successful campaign. He saw the flicker of his own golden light in the core of their life force, the indelible brand he had left upon their souls. It was a constant, sickening reminder of the price of their lives. Annabeth's hand, still on his arm, tightened. She saw them too, and he felt a fresh wave of her fear, not of him, but for him. She guided him away from the silent assembly, towards the beach, her presence the only solid thing in a world that felt increasingly unreal. He collapsed onto the sand, the exhaustion hitting him not as a physical weariness, but as a deep, spiritual fatigue. He had projected his hope, his love, his very identity over millions of people. It had worked, but it had left him feeling thin, stretched, a pale imitation of himself. He stared out at the water, which looked dull and gray to his senses. Its familiar power a distant memory. Annabeth sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. For a long time, she said nothing. She just let him be, a silent, supportive presence against the crushing weight of his new reality. The sun began to set, painting the clouds in strokes of orange and violet, but the beauty of it felt distant, clinical. "I was wrong," she finally said, her voice soft against the gentle hiss of the waves. He turned to look at her. Her face was pale in the twilight, her gray eyes reflecting the dying light of the sky. The analytical fear was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. "You saved all those people, Percy," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I was so afraid of what the power was turning you into that I didn't see what you were choosing to do with it. You used it to give hope. I don't think any other god in history has ever done that. It cost something, he murmured, looking at his hands. It cost me. I know, she said. I can see it. You look faded. She hesitated, then took a deep breath, steeling herself. That's why I've been in the library. I haven't been sleeping. I've been reading everything, not just the Olympian scrolls. I convinced Argus to let me into the restricted section, the texts Chiron keeps locked away. The ones from before the gods. He looked at her, a flicker of interest cutting through his fatigue. And I found something, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It's not a weapon. It's a ritual, a theory, really, from a time when magic was more fundamental. It's about anchors. It says that a power too great for its vessel will inevitably consume it, transforming it into something unrecognizable. She was describing his life. The boy Di-Bin was being consumed by the god he was becoming. This text, she went on, her words coming faster now, a torrent of desperate hope, it describes a way to forge a metaphysical anchor. A way to bind the power to the vessel. Not to extinguish it, but to ground it. To tie it to your mortal self, to your memories, to your soul as it is now. It would mean suppressing the majority of this chakra. You wouldn't be able to teleport, or create things from nothing, or see the life force of the world. But you'd be, you. Just Percy. Strong, yes, the son of Poseidon, but not this. He stared at her, the implication of her words sinking in. A way out, an off-ramp from this terrifying, lonely road he was on. The quiet life they had dreamed of on the pier, a lifetime ago, suddenly felt like a tangible possibility again. To just be Percy Jackson, Annabeth Chase's boyfriend, a hero of Olympus who had earned his peace. The idea was so seductive it made his head spin. Is it possible? He asked, his voice hoarse. It's dangerous, she admitted, her honesty as sharp as ever. The ritual requires components that are almost impossible to find. A tear of a grateful goddess, the last breath of a dying star, and it would require you to willingly cede control, to let yourself be bound. It's a risk, a huge one, but it's a choice, your choice, a choice. For the first time since he'd touched that book, he felt like he had won. He could lay down the crown of the god he never wanted and try to reclaim the life of the boy he had been. The relief was so profound it was dizzying. He was about to answer, to tell her yes, to say that any risk was worth it, when a new presence manifested on the beach beside them. It wasn't a flash of light or a crack of thunder. The air simply grew heavy, with the scent of salt and the pressure of the deep ocean, and Poseidon was standing there. He wasn't in his usual Bermuda shorts. He wore a simple, dark tunic, and his face was etched with a gravity Percy had only seen during the Titan War. He looked old, ancient, and deeply weary. He wasn't here as the king of the seas. He was here as a father. Percy, he said, his voice a low rumble. He nodded to Annabeth, his eyes softening for a moment. Annabeth. Father, Percy said, getting to his feet. What are you doing here? Zeus will let him rage. Poseidon cut him off, his gaze fixed on his son. He looked at Percy's mismatched eyes, at the faded energy signature Annabeth had noticed, and a look of profound pain crossed his face. I am not here as an Olympian. I am here because my son is in trouble. He stepped closer, his presence a comfort and a warning all at once. The council is fractured. Zeus is consumed by fear and rage. He has commanded Hephaestus to forge a weapon. Not to kill you, but to seal you away from this reality forever. They're calling it the God Seal. They are gathering the components now. They mean to trap you, Percy. To erase you as a factor in their world. Percy's blood ran cold. A cage. Forever. The choice Annabeth had offered suddenly seemed less like an option and more like a desperate necessity. But that is not our most immediate problem, Poseidon continued, his voice dropping even lower. He looked out at the dark water, but Percy knew he was seeing something much deeper. The entity you spoke of, this Erebus, his influence is spreading. It is a slow, creeping rot at the foundations of the world. It's more than just shades in a mortal city. It is a plague of apathy, of entropy. And it is seeping into the darkest corners of my domain. He turned back to Percy. His sea-green eyes, so much like Percy's own used to be, filled with a terrible light. Tartarus. The pit is quiet. The screams are fading. The fires burn less brightly. The very concept of eternal punishment is being eroded by this wave of absolute nothingness. And the chains, Percy, the chains that bind Typhon are failing. The name fell like a mountain into the conversation. Typhon, the father of all monsters, a storm giant so powerful it had taken the combined might of the entire pantheon to defeat and imprison him. The chains were forged by the Cyclops in the heart of Etna. Quenched in the river Lethe, Poseidon said, his voice strained. They were meant to last for eternity. But they were forged with divine power, with heat and magic. They have no defense against a force that simply unmakes things. The darkness is corroding them. They are flaking away into dust. He is stirring. If he breaks free, the war that follows will make the Titan War look like a skirmish. A new kind of dread, cold and absolute, settled over Percy. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about the end of the world. Can't you reforge them? Annabeth asked, her voice small. Poseidon shook his head, a look of bitter impotence on his face. Our power is useless. It's like trying to weld a shadow or repair a hole in the water. We can't fight nothing. Any magic we use is simply consumed by the corrosion. The greatest smiths on Olympus are helpless. He finally looked Percy directly in the eye, and the weight of his gaze was the weight of the entire ocean. But you are different. You don't just wield power. You create. You made a flower from nothing. You remade the souls of my nieces and nephews. You might be the only being in existence who can forge a chain from pure will. A bond that is not subject to the laws of this reality. One that cannot be unmade. The crossroads was no longer a choice between two paths. It was a cliff edge. Behind him was Annabeth's offer. A dangerous, uncertain path back to a normal life. Before him was the abyss, and a responsibility so immense it was crushing. To save the world, he would have to fully embrace the very power that was destroying him, the power that was isolating him from everyone he loved. He would have to become the god they all feared him to be. He looked at Annabeth. He saw the desperate hope in her eyes. The life she so badly wanted for them. And then he looked at his father, and saw the desperate fear for the world he was sworn to protect. The quiet dream of the boy on the pier dissolved in the face of the king's duty. He closed his eyes. The exhaustion was still there. A deep ache in his soul, but underneath it, a new, hard resolve was beginning to form. He wasn't a boy anymore. He couldn't afford to be. All right, he said, his voice steady. He opened his eyes, and they burned with a cold, clear light. Let's go forge some chains. Poseidon looked at him with a mixture of pride and sorrow. It must be done at the source. At the edge of the pit itself. I'm coming with you, Annabeth said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Annabeth, no, Percy started. Tartarus, you know what it's like. Quote, I'm not letting you go alone, she insisted, stepping forward, her fear now burned away by a fierce, protective fire. I was with you in the pit before, and I'm with you now. You said it yourself. You're the power. I'm the plan. If you are going to do this, to be this cosmic protector, then you need an anchor. Not a magical ritual to bind you, Percy. A person. To remind you what you're fighting for. He looked at her, at the unwavering resolve in her stormy gray eyes, and he felt a profound shift. She wasn't afraid of his power anymore. She had accepted it. She was choosing to stand with him, not behind him, but beside him. She was offering to be his partner in this new, terrifying reality. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He held out a hand to her. She took it without hesitation. Her grip was firm, real. The most real thing in his world. He placed his other hand on his father's shoulder. Take us to the edge, Percy said. Poseidon nodded grimly. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of crushing pressure and abyssal darkness. The journey was not the clean, instantaneous teleportation Percy could manage. It was a brutal descent through layers of reality. Past the underworld, past the realms of the dead, down into the deepest, most primal part of creation. They materialized on a jagged obsidian ledge. The air was thick, heavy, and tasted of despair and ancient dust. There was no sky, only an infinite, oppressive ceiling of rock. Below them was the abyss. Tartarus. It was different from how he remembered it. The landscape still shifted and groaned like a living, wounded thing, but the oppressive malevolence was muted. Faded. As his father had said, the fires burned less brightly. The screams of the damned were distant, half-hearted echoes. A creeping apathy, a cosmic boredom, was settling over the very concept of hell. And below, in the deepest part of the chasm, was a storm. A colossal, vaguely humanoid form of shadow and lightning, miles high. Typhon. He was stirring, his massive limbs testing their bonds. And Percy could see them, the great chains of Olympian make. They were dull, corroded, flaking away like ancient iron left in the rain. With every slow, ponderous movement the giant made, links of the chain turned to black dust and drifted away into the gloom. Annabeth gasped, her hand tightening in his. By the gods, the sheer scale of the threat was absolute. He had to act now. Percy stepped to the very edge of the precipice, Annabeth and Poseidon flanking him. He let go of their hands and held his own out over the abyss. He closed his eyes, shutting out the oppressive landscape, and reached inward. He bypassed the exhaustion, the fear, the loneliness, and tapped directly into the infinite ocean of power within him. He didn't draw on rage or fury. He did as Annabeth had said. He focused on his anchor. He thought of her hand in his. He thought of his mother's pride. He thought of the quiet loyalty of his friends. He drew on the fundamental concepts he was fighting for: permanence, order, loyalty, protection. He began to weave. Using the creation of all things, he pulled threads of pure energy from himself, spinning them into a new substance. It wasn't metal, it was solidified will. One thread was a shimmering, unbreakable gold, forged from his love and loyalty. The other was a deep, absolute black, forged from his grim, unyielding resolve. The threads emerged from his palms, twisting around each other in a perfect, helical pattern. A new chain, impossibly strong, impossibly real, was being born from nothingness. It flowed from his hands like a river of liquid starlight and shadow, silent and majestic. It snaked down into the abyss. It didn't clatter or clang. It moved with a silent, purposeful grace. It ignored the corroding touch of the darkness, for it was not made of a substance that could be unmade. It was a concept given form. The chain divided, multiplying, creating a vast net of gold and black. It wrapped around Typhon's colossal limbs, his torso, his neck. The giant roared, a soundless blast of pure rage and storm, and thrashed against the new bonds. But the chains held. They didn't even strain. They were absolute. Percy poured more of himself into the creation, forging great locking mechanisms that clamped shut with the finality of a cosmic law being written. He anchored the chains not to the crumbling rock of the pit, but to the very idea of imprisonment, binding them to the conceptual firmament of the universe itself. When it was done, Typhon was still. Encased in a beautiful, terrible cage of gold and black, he was more securely imprisoned than ever before. The threat was neutralized. The world was safe. Percy lowered his hands, a deep tremor running through his body. The expenditure of energy had been monumental. He staggered back, and Annabeth was there to catch him. He leaned against her, the deep soul fatigue returning tenfold. But as he looked at her, he saw no fear in her eyes. He saw awe, he saw understanding, and he saw a fierce, unwavering pride. She finally understood. His power wasn't a curse. It was a tool, a terrible, beautiful, cosmic tool, and he had just used it to save them all. "I'm with you," she whispered, her voice fierce and clear, echoing in the quiet dread of Tartarus. All the way, he had made his choice. He had given up the dream of being just Percy Jackson. He had accepted the mantle of the god, the king, the protector. And standing there, at the edge of hell with the girl he loved, he finally understood that he would not have to bear that mantle alone. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The God Killer's Gambit. The summons came, as they knew it would, not on a scroll borne by Hermes, but as a golden, shimmering pronouncement that filled the sky above Camp Half-Blood. It spoke with the disembodied, imperial voice of Zeus himself, a sound of rolling thunder and absolute command. It was an invitation, a command, really, for Perseus Jackson to appear on Olympus. A celebration was to be held in his honor. A feast to celebrate the hero who had single-handedly reinforced the CA.G.E. of Typhon and saved the world from a catastrophic threat. It was the most obvious trap in the history of obvious traps. Percy stood on the beach with Annabeth, watching the last of the golden light fade from the clouds. The tethered were gathered at a respectful distance, their silence a constant, unnerving presence. In the 2 days since their return from Tartarus, the camp had settled into a new, tense reality. The other campers gave the tethered a wide berth, their fear and awe a palpable thing. Percy was no longer just their leader, he was their god-king, an entity both beloved and terrifying. "A feast in my honor," Percy said, his tone dry. He's not even trying to be subtle. Subtlety is for those who aren't convinced of their own absolute power, Annabeth countered, her arms crossed as she stared up at the sky. Her mind was already working, dissecting the invitation, analyzing the motive, calculating the odds. He's angry, but he's also scared. The stunt in Tartarus proved you're not just a fluke. You're a power on a cosmic scale. This isn't a punishment, it's an assassination attempt disguised as a party. Neutralization, Percy corrected her, the word his father had used feeling cold and sterile. Hephaestus is building them a cage. A cage they have to get you into first, she pointed out, her stormy gray eyes meeting his. The fear was gone from them now, replaced by a sharp, strategic glint. He wants you on his home turf. The throne room, where his power is absolute, surrounded by his loyalists. He'll try to isolate you from your own power source. He thinks my power comes from the sea. Percy mused, feeling the infinite, churning ocean of chakra inside him. He has no idea what he's dealing with. Which is our advantage, she said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. They're planning a war with swords and lightning against an enemy who can rewrite the laws of physics. They'll be expecting a head-on fight, a challenge for dominance. And we're not going to give it to them. He finished her thought, the synergy between them now so complete it was almost telepathic. He could feel the quick, brilliant flashes of her strategic mind. A beacon of silver-gray light in his perception. He turned to the tethered. He had spent the last 2 days with them, trying to understand what he had done. He could feel their devotion, a constant, gentle pressure on his consciousness. But Annabeth was wrong about one thing. They weren't empty. He had remade their souls, yes, but he had built upon what was already there. Their loyalty wasn't mindless. It was absolute, a fundamental truth of their new existence, but their personalities, their memories, their selves remained. Connor Stoll still tried to pick his pocket. Katie Gardner still NDED to the infirmary's herb garden with fierce dedication. He had not stolen their will, he realized. He had simply become its sole focus. It was a terrifying responsibility, and one he refused to abuse. "I'm going to Olympus," he announced to them, his voice carrying easily across the sand. Alone. A murmur of protest, the first collective sound he had ever heard from them, rippled through the group. Sherman Yong, the burly son of Ares, stepped forward. "My lord, we should be at your side. Your place is here," Percy said, his tone gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. "Protecting the camp. This is my fight, not yours." He would not use them as his army. He would not become the tyrant Zeus imagined him to be. He turned back to Annabeth. "Alone, except for my strategist." Her smile was real this time. A flash of the old brilliance that made his chest ache. "Good, because I have a few ideas." They spent the next hour walking the beach, their heads close together, murmuring plans and contingencies. They were not walking into a trap. They were using the trap to spring one of their own. They were not going to Olympus to fight a war, but to end one before it began. When they were ready, Percy held out his hand. Annabeth took it. He focused his will, not on the energy signature of Olympus, but on the very center of its power, the throne room. The space before them warped. The familiar swirling vortex of Kamui opening a rift in reality. They stepped through, leaving the worried silence of Camp Half-Blood behind and stepping directly into the lion's den. The throne room was arranged for a feast. A long table laden with golden plates of ambrosia and goblets of nectar ran down the center of the hall. The great hearth crackled, casting a warm, inviting glow on the marble floors. But the atmosphere was anything but festive. The air was thick with tension, a heavy, static charge that promised a storm. Only a handful of gods were present, arrayed on their thrones. Zeus and Hera sat at the head, their faces impassive masks. Ares was there, a savage grin on his face, his hands clenching and unclenching. Hermes stood by his throne, his expression grim and conflicted. And Hephaestus, the forge god, sat slumped in his seat, his gaze fixed on the floor, an aura of profound regret emanating from him. Apollo, Artemis, Demeter, and Dionysus were conspicuously absent. This wasn't a council, it was a war party. Poseidon's throne was empty, a clear, deliberate message. He would not stand with his brother in this. Nor, Percy knew, could he stand against him. Perseus Jackson, Zeus's voice boomed, devoid of any celebratory warmth. You have come. Bold of you. You invited me, Percy replied, his voice calm. He and Annabeth walked slowly down the center of the hall, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He kept his senses open, his Rene Sharingan analyzing every detail of the room. He saw the shimmering, golden web of power that connected the thrones to Zeus, feeding his strength. He saw the jagged, chaotic spikes of energy radiating from Ares. And he saw something else. Under the floor, intricate runes and channels had been carved into the marble, glowing with a faint, suppressive energy. The trap was already active. Indeed, Zeus said, a cruel smile touching his lips. A feast to honor the anomaly who saved us all. We are so very grateful. He raised his hand, and the great bronze doors of the throne room slammed shut with a deafening boom. At the same moment, the glowing runes under the floor flared to life, a brilliant, golden light that filled the room. Percy felt it as a sudden, immense pressure, 1,000 gravities trying to crush him. It was a suppression field, designed to sever a demigod from their divine parentage, to cut them off from their power source. It was a powerful, intricate piece of magic. Against the son of Poseidon he had once been, it might even have worked. Against the Genturiki of the 10 Tails, it was like trying to dam the ocean with a fishing net. He stood perfectly still, allowing the pressure to wash over him. It strained against the outermost layers of his chakra, but the wellspring within was infinite, untouched. He didn't even flinch. Annabeth, however, gasped, stumbling against him. As a daughter of Athena, the field hit her with its full force, making her feel weak, disconnected. Percy subtly channeled a thread of his own chakra into her, stabilizing her, shielding her from the effect. She straightened, giving him a grateful, almost imperceptible nod. Zeus's smile faltered. He had expected Percy to be on his knees, gasping and weakened. He was still standing, looking utterly unimpressed. The pleasantries are over, then? Percy asked, his voice still calm. They are, Zeus snarled, rising from his throne. You are a cancer, Perseus Jackson. A threat to the divine order. You have defied the council, assaulted a god, and stolen the will of your fellow demigods. Your reign of chaos ends today. This isn't about order, Zeus, Annabeth's voice rang out, sharp and clear. This is about fear. You're afraid of a power you don't understand, so your only solution is to destroy it. Silence. Girl, Ares roared, leaping from his throne. He had grown, his form now a 20-foot-tall behemoth clad in blood-red armor, a massive, jagged sword in his hand. Quote, "You'll get your turn after I'm done with him." The war god charged, his speed shaking the very foundations of the hall. He was a force of pure, divine violence, an avatar of slaughter. Percy didn't move. Annabeth's voice echoed in his mind, a connection they had forged through his chakra, a private line of communication. His attacks are all forward momentum. He's a battering ram. Don't meet his force. Redirect it. As Ares's massive blade swung down, an attack meant to cleave the world in two, Percy simply took a slight step to the side. He raised his right hand, his palm open. Shinra Tensai. He used the gravitational push not as a massive blast, but as a focused, surgical tool. A small, invisible fist of force slammed into the flat of Ares's blade. It didn't stop the attack. It accelerated it, deflecting it just enough to send the war god stumbling past him. Ares roared in frustration, his own immense strength used against him, and crashed into the feast table, sending ambrosia and nectar scattering in a shower of gold. Before Ares could recover, Hermes was on him. The messenger god moved as a blur of gold, striking from 1,000 different angles at once. Fists, feet, the edge of his caduceus, they all rained down on Percy in a microsecond. He's too fast to track, but his path is predictable, Annabeth sent. He always circles to your left before resetting his attack pattern. He's creating a vortex. Percy didn't try to block. He didn't need to. His Rinne Sharingan saw it all, not as a blur, but as 1,000 distinct golden threads of intent. He moved in the eye of the hurricane, his body flowing like water, ducking and weaving through the storm of blows without being touched. It was a perfect, effortless dance of evasion. He waited for the flicker in Hermes's pattern Annabeth had predicted. There, the subtle shift to the left. As Hermes reappeared for a final, decisive blow, Percy's hand shot out. Not to strike, but to grab. He caught the caduceus mid-swing. Hermes's eyes widened in shock. No one had ever been fast enough to even see him, let alone catch him. Percy tightened his grip, and the divine energy crackling through the staff was suddenly siphoned away. Absorbed harmlessly into his palm. The Preta path, the caduceus, its power drained, felt like a simple piece of metal. Percy wrenched it from the god's grasp and tossed it aside. He then placed his palm flat on Hermes's chest. A gentle, irresistible push of gravitational force sent the messenger god flying backward, tumbling through the air to land in a heap near the hearth. Two gods, two of the most powerful Olympians, taken down without a single offensive blow. It was a display of control so absolute, so effortless, it was more terrifying than any show of raw power. Enough, Zeus roared. He raised his own hand, and the runes on the floor pulsed violently. From the center of the room, a pillar of golden light erupted, and a device rose into the air. It was a complex astral abe of celestial bronze and imperial gold, spinning rings within rings, all centered on a pulsating, black crystal. It radiated an aura of absolute finality. This was it, Hephaestus's god seal. Your power is an abomination, Jackson. Zeus bellowed. Let us see how you fare when it is ripped from your very soul. The device whirred to life. The black crystal pulsed, and Percy felt a terrible, targeted pull on his chakra. It was like a metaphysical hook had sunk into his core, attempting to drag the 10 tails out of him. It was excruciating, a violent tearing sensation at the very root of his being. Percy, the thrones. Annabeth's thought was a desperate shout. The device isn't self-powered. It's drawing its energy from the thrones of the gods present. Zeus, Hera, Ares, Hermes, and Hephaestus. It's a focusing lens for their combined might. You have to break the connection. Percy grit his teeth against the searing pain. He could fight it. He could probably overpower it with raw force, but it would be a struggle. And it would destroy half of Olympus. Annabeth had given him a better way. A surgical strike. He looked at Ares, who was just getting to his feet, bellowing in rage. Percy's gaze hardened. He formed a hand sign, a single, fluid motion. From his own shadow, a perfect, chakra-infused replica of himself emerged. A shadow clone. The clone shot towards Ares while Percy himself dealt with the god seal. He raised a hand towards the spinning device, not to push it, but to pull. Bansho Tenon. He didn't pull the device itself. He pulled on the streams of divine energy flowing into it from the thrones. He yanked them, twisted them, disrupting the flow. The god seal sputtered, the terrible pull on his soul lessening for a moment. Meanwhile, his clone reached the furious war god. Ares swung his massive sword, but the clone was faster. It ducked under the swing and slammed its palm into Ares's chest. It wasn't a normal strike. It was a gentle fist technique, a concept utterly alien to this world. Designed to inject chakra directly into an opponent's energy system. Ares's divine power short-circuited. The god gasped, his physical form flickering as he dropped to one knee, momentarily paralyzed. His connection to the god seal severed. One down. Zeus saw what was happening and intensified the power flow from his own throne, compensating for the loss of Ares. The pulling sensation on Percy's soul returned with a vengeance. Percy grit his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. The strain was immense. He had to end this. Now, he abandoned his efforts to disrupt the energy streams. He let the full force of the god seal latch onto him. And then, with a defiant roar that shook the heavens, he pulled back. He wasn't just resisting the pull. He was actively engaging in a tug of war. His chakra, the power of a celestial god beast, versus the combined might of 5 Olympians. The god seal began to shriek, the spinning rings glowing cherry red as they re-flooded with a power they were never designed to contain. Cracks began to form in the black crystal at its heart. Impossible, Zeus roared, pouring more and more of his own power into the device. He's emptying his reserves. Annabeth thought, her voice laced with triumphant urgency. He's weakening himself. Percy. Now. This was the moment they had planned for. This was the checkmate. Percy let go. He didn't cut his connection to the device. He pushed. A tidal wave of his own raw, untamed chakra flooded back up the streams of energy, directly into the thrones of the gods who powered it. Hephaestus was thrown from his seat as his throne sparked and went dark. Hermes cried out as a backlash of energy threw him against a wall. But the main target was Zeus. The king of the gods screamed, as Percy's alien energy surged into his throne and then into him. The master bolt clattered from his hand. The storm of divine power that always surrounded him died, leaving him looking shockingly mortal. The god seal, overloaded and its power source compromised, exploded in a silent, violent flash of golden light and black dust. The trap was broken. The battle was over. Percy stood panting in the center of the ruined hall. His clone dissolved into smoke. He walked past the groaning, incapacitated forms of Ares and Hermes. He walked past a stunned and horrified Hera. He walked directly to the foot of the throne of Zeus. The king of the gods struggled to his feet, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief and a new, profound fear. He was beaten. His gambit had failed. His ultimate weapon was a pile of dust. Percy looked up at the god who had tried to erase him. He could end it. He could vaporize him with a tailed beast bomb. He could rip his soul from his body. He could trap him in an illusion for 10,000 years. The knowledge was there, cold and clinical. But he did none of those things. He did what he and Annabeth had decided. He would not win by force. He would win by forcing an understanding. He raised his right hand. "I'm sorry about this," he said, his voice quiet. "But you need to see." He lunged forward, his speed now unhindered. Before Zeus could even react, Percy's palm was flat against the god's forehead. He activated the human path. It was not a gentle probing. It was a violent psychic intrusion. Percy didn't read Zeus's mind. He wrote on it. He didn't extract information. He uploaded it. Zeus screamed, a raw, agonized sound, as Percy's consciousness merged with his. He was no longer on Olympus. He was in Boston, a helpless mortal as a Nycti. Vor drained the warmth and hope from his soul, leaving only a cold, gray apathy. He was in Tartarus, feeling the great chains of his own making corroding into nothingness, feeling the oppressive, chill of Erebus's influence seeping into the very foundations of reality. He felt the cold, ancient, vast consciousness of the primordial darkness, and he understood its goal not as conquest, but as an absolute erasure of everything he and all the gods had ever built. He saw the world through Percy's eyes, saw the tapestry of life force, and watched as Erebus's power tore holes in it, holes that no amount of lightning or divine authority could ever hope to mend. Percy poured the truth of their new reality directly into the mind of his greatest enemy. He showed him the futility of their power against a conceptual foe. He showed him the necessity of his own, alien abilities. He showed him everything. When he was done, he pulled his hand back. Zeus collapsed onto his throne, his body trembling, his eyes wide with a cosmic horror he had never known. The king of the gods, who had faced titans and giants, had just looked into the true void, and it had broken his pride completely. He looked at Percy, who stood before him, not as a rebellious demigod, but as a grim, necessary reality. He was not a cancer. He was the cure. "You see now," Percy said. It wasn't a question. Zeus could only nod, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The rage was gone, burned away by the cold fire of truth. "Erebus is the enemy," Percy stated. "Not me. He's coming for everything. Your world, my world, and your way of fighting won't work. We need a new way." He looked around the ruined throne room, at the defeated gods. "This fighting is over. The civil war ends now. You can either stand with me, or you can stand aside. But if you stand against me, you are standing with the darkness that wants to unmake us all. The choice is yours." He turned and walked towards Annabeth, who was watching with wide, proud eyes. He took her hand. A fragile, tense, and utterly necessary alliance had just been forged in the fires of a failed execution. The old order was shattered. A new one, with Percy at its center, had just begun. And the shadow war against the encroaching darkness was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Shadow War. The Olympian throne room had been transformed. The thrones, symbols of a fractured and hierarchical power, had been moved back against the walls. In their place, in the very center of the hall where Percy had been judged and had single-handedly dismantled the old order, now stood a simple, round table carved from a single piece of moon silver. It was Annabeth's idea, a piece of political genius that was both a concession and a declaration. It allowed the gods to keep their seats of power, but forced them to meet on neutral, equal ground. This was the First War Council. Percy sat at the table, Annabeth at his right. He could feel the chaotic symphony of their energies. Zeus was a tightly contained storm of resentment and grudging acceptance. Ares radiated sullen fury, his power a jagged, angry red. Athena was a cool, analytical silver, her mind constantly probing, observing, calculating. Hermes was a nervous, quicksilver flicker, his awe still warring with his fear. Poseidon was a deep, steady blue at Percy's side, a silent, supportive presence. This was their fragile alliance. He calls himself Erebus, Percy began, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the vast chamber. He didn't look at Zeus for permission to speak. He didn't need it anymore. He was the de facto leader of this war, a reality that still grated on the king of the gods. But he isn't a being we can fight. He isn't an army we can meet on a battlefield. He is a concept, a sentient void. He is the end of all things, Zeus rumbled, his voice heavy with the memory of the thoughts Percy had forced into his mind. It was a confirmation, a capitulation. The final silence. Ares scoffed, slamming a gauntleted fist on the silver table. So what are we supposed to do? How do you punch silence? How do you stab a concept in the gut? This is ridiculous. We need a target. That's the point. Ares, Annabeth said, her voice cutting through the war god's bluster. We can't fight him. We have to fight his influence. Erebus works like a plague. He finds a weakness, a crack in the world's foundation, and he pours his essence into it. He doesn't conquer, he erodes. He doesn't kill, he unmakes. My son can see this influence, Poseidon added, his gaze sweeping the council. He sees it as we see the currents of the ocean. He is our eyes, our only eyes. Percy closed his own, just for a second, focusing on the tapestry of life that was now his constant companion. It's like a fraying piece of cloth, he tried to explain, translating the cosmic sensory data into a language they could understand. Most of the world is bright, a complex web of life and energy. But there are dark spots. Places where the threads are thin, where the light is weak. That's where he'll strike. He's not a warrior. He's an opportunist. So we play defense? Athena asked, her sharp gray eyes fixed on Percy. We wait for him to make a move and then you, what? Plug the hole. We can't just plug the holes, Percy said. When I fought his shades in Boston, destroying them with force just made the void they left behind even stronger. We have to do what Annabeth said. We have to fight his influence with its opposite. He attacks with apathy, so I answered with hope. He erodes with nothingness, so I have to reinforce with creation. You are making yourself the sole pillar holding up the sky, my boy, Hephaestus grunted from his distant throne, speaking for the first time. The Forge god was still shaken from the destruction of his god seal, his respect for Percy's power now absolute. A single pillar can still break. That's why you're here, Percy said, his gaze sweeping the table. I can be the shield, but I can't be everywhere at once. We need a new kind of army. We need to be proactive. Athena, Annabeth, you two need to identify the world's weak points, not just strategically, but culturally. Places of despair, of conflict, of deep-seated fear. Hermes, you are the early warning system. I need you to be my eyes and ears on the mortal plane, to feel for the subtle changes. The strange silences. Ares, your strength is not useless, but you cannot be a battering ram. You must be a scalpel. When a physical threat manifests, a monster empowered by the void, you must strike with precision, not just rage. He was giving them orders. He, a half-blood, was directing the gods of Olympus on how to fight a war. The tension in the room thickened, but no one argued. The memory of their defeat was too fresh. They were listening. Their planning was cut short by a strangled gasp. Not from anyone at the table, but from within Percy's own mind. A scream, not of a single person, but of a city. He clutched his head, a searing pain lancing through his skull as his senses were violently assaulted. Percy. Poseidon's hand was on his shoulder. It's happening again, Percy grunted. His eyes squeezed shut. He was seeing it, a massive, spreading stain on the tapestry of life. A beautiful, intricate pattern of lights being smothered under a creeping, insidious blanket of gray. Paris. He's attacking Paris. He pushed his senses further, trying to understand the nature of the attack. It wasn't a wave of apathy like in Boston. This was something else. It was agitated, chaotic, a maelstrom of negative emotion. It's fear, he whispered, his eyes snapping open. He's weaponized fear. Within seconds, Hermes had confirmed it. His energy flickered, and a projection of the city appeared over the silver table. It was nighttime in the city of light, but the lights were going out. A strange, thick, unnatural fog was rolling through the streets, clinging to the ground, seeping under doors and through windows. It wasn't a normal fog. It was a murky, greasy gray, and it seemed to swallow the light of the street lamps. Mortals caught in it didn't just freeze. They collapsed, writhing on the ground, their faces contorted in silent screams. A sleeping plague, Athena diagnosed, her face grim. It seems to be inducing some kind of instantaneous, comatose state. It's worse than that, Percy said, his vision piercing the veil of the physical. He could see the sleeping mortals. He could see their minds, their consciousnesses. They were trapped in nightmares. And the fog was feeding on it. Every silent scream, every jolt of terror from the dreaming minds, caused the gray mist to thicken, to darken, to spread further. It's a psychic parasite, a nightmare fog. It feeds on fear to grow. The more people it traps, the more powerful it becomes. I will burn it away. Apollo's voice boomed as he and his sister, Artemis, suddenly materialized in the throne room, drawn by the crisis. Apollo raised his hand, and a miniature sun, a ball of concentrated light and heat, blazed into existence above his palm. No, wait, Percy shouted, but it was too late. Apollo hurled the sun into the projected image. For a moment, the fog in the center of Paris was incinerated, a huge section of the city cleared by the divine light. But then, as the light faded, the fog that remained at the edges seemed to creep back in, drawn to the stark new shadows the brilliant light had created. It returned with a vengeance, thicker and darker than before. Apollo's attack had only fed it. Artemis drew her bow, a silver arrow of pure moonlight knocked on the string. It is a creature of darkness. My light will pierce it. She loosed the arrow. It flew true, but when it entered the fog, it simply vanished, its energy consumed without a trace. The gods looked on, their greatest weapons, the sun and the moon, rendered utterly useless. The nightmare fog continued its silent, inexorable spread. We have to go, Percy said, pushing himself to his feet. He looked at Annabeth, a silent question in his eyes. She responded with a sharp, determined nod. We are coming with you, Zeus declared, his voice a low thunderclap. The forced memory of the void was still fresh in his mind. He would not stand by again. No, Percy countered, his authority absolute. You will do more harm than good. Your very presence, your power, it's like throwing fuel on a fire. You would create more fear for it to feed on. Annabeth and I will go. The rest of you, find the source. This fog is being generated from a single point. A psychological epicenter. Athena, work with Annabeth's schematics of the city. Find the most likely point of origin. He didn't wait for an answer. He placed a hand on Annabeth's shoulder, and the world twisted around them. They materialized on the observation deck of the Montparnasse Tower, a skyscraper that gave them a panoramic view of the afflicted city. The sight was apocalyptic. Below them, Paris was a city drowning in a sea of roiling, gray mist. The lights were almost all gone, swallowed by the oppressive gloom. The only sounds were the distant, mournful wail of automated sirens and the soft, hungry hiss of the fog itself. The Eiffel Tower, the city's iconic heart, was a skeleton of dark iron half submerged in the creeping tide. Annabeth pulled a celestial bronze laptop from her pack, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Athena is feeding me data. Heat maps, energy signatures, ley lines, the fog is spreading concentrically. But the energy readings are strongest around one point. She pointed a shaking finger towards the north. The Père Lachaise cemetery. Of course, Percy muttered. A city of the dead. A place of grief and memory. The perfect breeding ground for fear. We can't fight our way through that, Annabeth said, looking down at the miles of fog-choked streets between them and their target. It's too dense. It would overwhelm us before we got halfway. Percy extended his senses, feeling the terror of millions of trapped minds. It was a cacophony of psychic screams. A buffet for the entity feeding on them. He tried a small experiment. He formed a Rasengan in his palm, a swirling sphere of pure chakra, and thrust it down into the fog below. The attack tore a temporary hole in the mist. But just as on Olympus, the fog swirled back in moments later, even thicker than before. Annabeth was right. Force was useless. He remembered her words from Boston, her words from just an hour ago on Olympus. Fight it with its opposite. What was the opposite of fear? Courage. No, that was just fighting fear on its own terms. Bravery required something to be brave against. The opposite of the chaotic, screaming panic of a nightmare wasn't a battle cry. It was peace, serenity, the quiet, unshakable certainty that everything was going to be all right. You're right, he said to Annabeth. We can't fight through it. So we have to get rid of it. All of it, at once. She looked at him, her eyes widening as she understood the sheer scale of what he was proposing. Percy, that's an entire city. Millions of people. To project your will on that scale, after Boston, it could destroy you. It's the only way, he said, his voice grim. He looked towards the Eiffel Tower. I need a high point. An antenna. He grabbed her hand, and in a flicker of movement using his own raw speed, they were standing on the highest platform of the Eiffel Tower, the wind whipping at their clothes. Below them, the world was a formless, gray ocean. The gods will need to protect you while you're doing whatever you're about to do, Annabeth said, her voice tight with worry. Percy closed his eyes, reaching out not with his senses, but with his will, speaking to the minds of the council on Olympus. Zeus, I need a perimeter. Now. The response was immediate. A ring of golden lightning slammed down on the Champ de Mars. The park surrounding the tower, incinerating the fog in a perfect circle. A moment later, Ares appeared in a flash of red light, his sword drawn. Artemis and Apollo materialized beside him. Their bows glowing, they formed a protective triangle around the base of the tower, a small, desperate island of divinity in an ocean of nightmare. They would keep any physical manifestations of the fear from reaching him. Percy nodded once, a silent thanks. He turned to Annabeth. This is going to be loud, he said. Stay with me, always, she whispered, her hand gripping his tightly. He sat down, crossing his legs in a meditative pose on the cold iron of the platform. He closed his eyes, and the world of sight and sound fell away. He was adrift in the screaming chaos of a city's collective nightmare. He felt their terror, their pain, their deepest anxieties brought to life. He had to give them a different dream. He reached into himself, not for the fire of hope he had used in Boston, but for something quieter. He found the memory of lying on the pier at camp, his head in Annabeth's lap, the world at peace. He found the feeling of the deep, silent places of his father's ocean, where no storm could reach. He found the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, of a friend saved. He gathered all the peace, all the calm, all the serenity he possessed. And then, he began to sing. It wasn't a song of words or music. It was a song of pure chakra, a broadcast of consciousness. He pushed it out of himself, using the Eiffel Tower as a giant tuning fork, vibrating with his will. It was a gentle, psychic lullaby. A wave of pure, unadulterated peace. The wave washed over Paris. It flowed into the streets, into the apartments, into the houses. It seeped into the minds of the sleeping victims, not as an invading force, but as a gentle offer. A quiet counter-melody to the screaming orchestra of their nightmares. In her dream, a young woman was falling from a skyscraper. Just before she hit the ground, she felt a sudden, inexplicable calm. The feeling of the wind rushing past became a gentle caress. The fear vanished. She landed not on hard pavement, but in a soft, warm bed. The memory of a forgotten lullaby echoing in her mind. A man was being chased by a faceless monster through an endless, dark hallway. The monster raised its claws, but the man was no longer afraid. He felt a profound sense of peace. The hallway dissolved, and he was sitting on a sunny beach, watching the gentle tide roll in. One by one, a million nightmares were transformed. The lullaby of serenity didn't erase the fear, it soothed it. It didn't wake the dreamers, it gave them good dreams. The effect on the nightmare fog was instantaneous and catastrophic. Deprived of its food source, its diet of pure terror suddenly replaced by an indigestible wave of peace, the fog began to starve. It writhed, it thinned, it turned from a greasy gray to a pale, translucent white. It lost its cohesion, its malevolent intelligence. It was no longer a psychic parasite. It was just mist. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, its first rays striking the top of the Eiffel Tower, the last of the fog evaporated, burned away by the simple, honest light of a new day. Paris was silent. Then, slowly, lights began to flicker on in windows. People stirred, waking from the deepest, most peaceful sleep of their lives. They felt rested, calm, their anxieties of the previous day strangely distant. They would never know how close they had come to being consumed. On top of the tower, Percy slumped forward, his consciousness crashing back into his body. The effort had been cataclysmic. He felt like a hollowed-out bell, still vibrating from a monumental strike. He was so drained he couldn't even move. Annabeth was there, catching him, holding him, her presence a solid, grounding force. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Oh, gods, Percy, you did it." He could only lean against her, his energy completely spent. He had won another battle. He had saved another city. He had proven, once again, that he was the only one who could stand against this new, insidious darkness. And as he looked out over the waking city, he felt it again. The cold, silent observer. The presence of Erebus, watching from the void. There was no anger, no frustration. There was only a chilling, patient thought that bloomed in the back of his exhausted mind. Clever. You teach them to hope. You sing them to sleep. You are a brilliant, beautiful candle. But you are only one. And the universe is so very dark. And I have all the time in the world to wait for you to burn out. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Price of Power. The aftermath of Paris was a quiet, grinding affair. There was no victory parade, no celebration on Olympus. The alliance held, but it was a coalition born of necessity, not trust. The gods now treated Percy with a mixture of terrified respect and wary distance. He was their weapon, their shield, the linchpin of their entire defense strategy, but he was also a constant, living reminder of their own inadequacy. He attended the war councils, delivered his reports with a clinical detachment, and then retreated back to the isolation of Camp Half-Blood. He was burning out. Erebus's taunt had been more than a threat, it was a diagnosis. Each grand, world-saving act took a piece of him. Boston had cost him his emotional vibrancy, leaving him feeling stretched and thin. Paris had drained his spiritual reserves, leaving a deep, sonant exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. He felt like a battery being constantly drained and never fully recharged. The infinite ocean of chakra within him was still there, but his ability to access it, to be the vessel for it, was a finite thing. He was a mortal container holding an immortal power, and the strain was causing cracks in the porcelain. He grew quiet, withdrawn. The easy laughter that had once defined him was a rare, fleeting thing. He would stand on the beach for hours, staring out at a sea whose power he could barely feel anymore, insulated from his own heritage by the cosmic force he now wielded. The tethered were his constant, silent companions, their unwavering devotion a comfort and a crushing burden. They were a living mirror of the violation he had committed, the price he had paid to save them. Annabeth was his only anchor. She saw the toll it was taking, the light in his eyes slowly dimming, replaced by the ancient, weary glow of the René Sharingan. She fought, in her own way, to keep him grounded. She would drag him to the armory to spar, forcing him to rely on his old instincts with Riptide, trying to reconnect him with the muscle and sinew of the demigod he had been. She would read to him from her favorite architecture books, her voice a steady, grounding rhythm in the chaotic silence of his mind. She would hold his hand, her touch a real, tangible thing in a world that was becoming an abstract tapestry of energy. "You can't keep doing this," she said one evening. They were sitting on the porch of the big house, watching the fireflies dance over the strawberry fields. "You can't be the world's emotional lightning rod, Percy. It's killing you. What's the alternative? He asked, his voice flat. He wasn't arguing. It was a genuine question. Let a city full of people be eaten by nightmares. Let the world fall into apathy and darkness. The alternative is letting us help, she insisted, her voice fierce. The gods. The camp. You've made this your burden alone. You go off and perform these cosmic miracles, and you come back, less. You have to let us carry some of the weight. You can't, he said, the words tasting like ash. Your power, the gods' power. It's like throwing gasoline on the fire. It's a different operating system. I'm the only one who's compatible with the new software. The cold, detached way he said it ghttened her more than any outburst of anger. He was starting to see himself not as a person, but as a function. A tool. Then we find another way, she said, her jaw set with stubborn resolve. There has to be another way. Erebus, ever the opportunist, chose this moment of weakness, this crack in the vessel, to make his next move. It came not as a psychic whisper or a creeping fog, but as a brutal, physical declaration of war. The attack struck at the heart of the divine world, the Panathenaic Stadium in Athens, the site of the original Olympic Games and a place still thrumming with the residual power of millennia of worship and competition. A tremor, and the earth split open. From the fissure rose a creature of ancient, forgotten terror. It was Lysaon, the first werewolf. But he was changed. Hermes's frantic projection appeared before the council on Olympus. It showed Lysaon, but his fur was no longer brown, but the color of absolute, lightless night. His claws and teeth were not bone, but jagged shards of solidified shadow. His eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent purple light. He was larger, faster, and radiating an aura of pure, unadulterated predatory hunger. Dark, shadow, way tendrils of Erebus's power snaked around his limbs, feeding him, empowering him. He's been elevated, Athena murmured, her face pale as she watched the projection. Lysaon, a minor but persistent threat, had been transformed into a god-level monster. He is a vessel, Percy said, his voice a low growl. He stood before the council, his eyes fixed on the image of the corrupted werewolf. Erebus has found his champion. He's poured his power into a mortal monster to give it a physical form he can use to attack us directly. Artemis, whose rivalry with Lysaon was ancient and personal, was on her feet. Her silver bow already in her hand. This mockery cannot be allowed to stand. He is my prey. She vanished in a flash of moonlight. A moment later, she reappeared on the projection, standing in the ruins of the ancient stadium. She loosed a volley of silver arrows, each one capable of felling a titan. They struck Lysaon's shadowy hide and dissolved, their divine light consumed by the pure darkness of his new form. Lysaon laughed, a sound like grinding rocks and tearing flesh. He moved with a speed that was a blur even to a goddess's eyes, a streak of absolute night. He slammed into Artemis, sending her flying into a marble column with a sickening crunch. He stood over her, his shadow claws raised, ready to deliver a killing blow. In that instant, a swirling vortex opened between them, and Percy stepped out. Riptide in his hand, he parried the downward slash of Lysaon's claws, the impact of celestial bronze on pure shadow creating a deafening, discordant shriek that cracked the remaining stones of the stadium. Get her out of here, Percy commanded without looking back. Ares appeared, grabbing the stunned and injured Artemis and vanishing in a flash of red light. Now he was alone with the monster. The little goatling, Lysaon snarled, his voice a layered chorus of his own and the cold, vast presence of Erebus. The bright, burning candle. My master sends his regards. He wishes to snuff you out. Tell your master to face me himself, Percy shot back, his eyes narrowing. He could see it now. The core of Lysaon's being was still there, a frantic, hateful spark of a wolf's soul. But it was encased in a thick, parasitic shell of Erebus's power, a suit of armor made of pure void. This was not a conceptual battle. This was a physical fight. For the first time, Percy felt a flicker of his old self, the thrill of combat, the familiar weight of Riptide in his hand. He wouldn't win this with a psychic lullaby. He would win this with a sword. He charged. Lysaon met him, and the battle that followed was a cataclysm. It was a fight of impossible contrasts. The divine light of celestial bronze against the all-consuming darkness of shadow. The fluid, instant, cetual grace of a swordsman against the brutal, overwhelming force of a primordial beast. Percy was faster, more skilled. He weaved and dodged, riptide a blur of bronze, landing a dozen strikes for every one of Lysaon's wild, clumsy swipes. But his sword, the blade that had slain titans and giants, seemed to have little effect. It would pass through Lysaon's shadowy hide, causing the darkness to swirl and hiss. But the wound would close instantly, leaving no mark. He was fighting a living shadow. Lysaon, on the other hand, only needed to land one blow. He swung his massive claws, and Percy was forced to parry. The impact sent a jarring, numbing coldness up his arm. The shadow claws were not just sharp, they were imbued with the same unmaking property as the corrosion in Tartarus. They fought across the ruins, their battle a whirlwind of destruction. Percy was forced onto the defensive, his superior skill barely enough to keep him alive against the werewolf's relentless, brute force assault and near total invulnerability. He was tiring, the deep, soul-level exhaustion a heavy weight on his limbs. "He's a vessel, Percy," Annabeth's voice echoed in his mind, a clear, steady signal from Olympus. "You can't destroy the vessel while it's full. You have to empty it first." Of course, he couldn't kill the darkness, but he could separate it from its host. He changed his tactics. He disengaged, putting distance between himself and the beast. He sheathed Riptide, a clear sign that the sword fight was over. Lysaon laughed. "Giving up so soon, little god." Percy held up his right hand, his palm open. His Rinnegan pulsed with power. "You're just a parasite's puppet, Lysaon. Let's cut the strings." He activated the Preta path, the power to absorb energy. A powerful, invisible vortex of suction erupted from his palm, directed solely at the werewolf. It wasn't pulling on Lysaon's physical body. It was pulling on the dark, parasitic energy that encased it. Lysaon screamed, a sound of pure agony. The shadowy tendrils of Erebus's power that made up his armor were being forcibly ripped from him, drawn into Percy's hand in screaming, black streams. The werewolf began to shrink, his fur turning from absolute black back to a matted, mangy brown. The divine power was being stripped away, leaving only the monster beneath. But the power he was absorbing, it was poison. It wasn't chi like absorbing a lightning bolt from Zeus. This was pure, conceptual nothingness. As it flowed into him, he felt a chilling, hollowing cold spread through his own chakra network. It was like injecting ice into his veins. It was negating his own life force, fighting his very existence from the inside out. The pain was excruciating, a soul-deep agony that made the god seal feel like a mild headache. He grit his teeth, refusing to break the connection. He had to drain it all. He had to empty the vessel. With a final, agonized howl, the last of the shadow energy was ripped from Lysaon, leaving the original werewolf standing there. Smaller, weaker, and completely bewildered. Percy collapsed to one knee, panting, the cold in his veins making him tremble. He had won. He had defeated Erebus's champion. But the champion wasn't the real weapon. The poison was. Before Percy could recover, Lysaon, acting on pure, desperate instinct, lunged. He was no longer a god-level threat, but he was still a powerful, ancient monster. From his hand, a single, final shard of solidified shadow, a remnant of Erebus's power he had managed to retain, shot out like a dagger. Percy was too exhausted to dodge. He tried to raise a hand to block, but he was too slow. The shadow dagger struck him in the left shoulder. The pain was unlike anything he had ever felt. It wasn't a cut, it wasn't a stab, it was an injection of absolute void. He cried out, stumbling back, clutching at his shoulder. On Olympus, the council watched in horror as a creeping, black stain began to spread from Percy's shoulder, a web of dark, dead veins branching out across his skin. His own life force, the brilliant, multicolored storm of chakra, was being devoured, erased by the spreading patch of nothingness. His healing powers, the same powers that could remake a soul, were useless against it. They couldn't heal a wound that was actively unmaking the flesh it occupied. Enraged, Percy raised his free hand. He pointed a single finger at the cowering, terrified Lysaon. A miniature-tailed beast bomb, no bigger than a marble, shot from his fingertip. It struck the werewolf, and Lysaon ceased to exist, erased in a silent, final flash of light. But the damage was done. Percy stood alone in the ruins, the black wound on his shoulder spreading slowly but inexorably. He could feel it, a cold, dead spot in his own soul. A permanent piece of the void now lodged inside him. He had won the battle, but in doing so, he had sustained an injury that his own god-like power could not heal. He had a scar now. Not a mark of victory, but a physical manifestation of the war's terrible price, a constant reminder of the darkness he was fighting, a darkness that was now a part of him. He looked down at the creeping black veins, and for the first time since this had all begun, he felt a genuine, cold spike of his own fear. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Eve of Extinction. The wound did not fester. It did not bleed. It simply was. A patch of his skin, spreading out from his left shoulder, was now a dead, starless black, crisscrossed with veins that looked like cracks in obsidian. It was cold to the touch, a patch of absolute nothingness that his own life force could not reclaim. The pain of the initial impact had subsided, replaced by a constant, low-level thrum of wrongness, a dissonant note in the symphony of his own being. It was more than a physical injury. It was a spiritual poison. In the days that followed his victory over Lysown, a subtle but terrifying change began to take hold. The soul-deep exhaustion that had plagued him was now tinged with something colder, sharper. His patience grew thin. The quiet, detached calm he had cultivated was increasingly punctuated by flashes of sharp, irritable anger. When one of the tethered accidentally dropped a platter of nectar, Percy's glare was so intense, so filled with a cold, ancient fury, that the boy burst into tears. Percy felt a pang of his old self, a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly smothered by a wave of chilling indifference. The darkness inside him was feeding on his negative emotions. The frustration of his endless, lonely war. The resentment he felt towards the now dependent gods, the grief for the life he had lost. The wound drank it all, and the black veins spread, just a fraction of a millimeter, with every dark thought. Erebus had lost his champion, but he had successfully planted his flag on the very soul of his enemy. Annabeth saw it all. She watched as the man she loved fought a war on two fronts, one against the encroaching void, and one against the void that now resided within him. She became his rock, his conscience, his unwavering North Star. When he would retreat into a cold, angry silence, she would sit with him, not speaking, but simply being a warm, living presence against his growing internal winter. She researched relentlessly, poring over the most forbidden scrolls with Athena, searching for a way to cleanse the wound. They found nothing. How do you remove a piece of nothing? How do you heal a wound that is literally the absence of being? The War Council meetings on Olympus became even more tense. The gods watched Percy with a new kind of fear. They saw the black wound. They felt the shift in his energy, the cold, sharp edges that hadn't been there before. They were no longer just afraid of his power. They were afraid of what that power, tainted by the essence of their ultimate enemy, might become. His attacks are becoming more erratic, Athena noted one day, her voice low. APR. Ojection over the silver table showed a dozen minor incursions of shadowy beasts across the globe, all neutralized by Percy. Before, he acted with precision, with the minimum force necessary. Now, he is using overwhelming power. Annihilation. It's effective, but it's reckless. The boy is wounded, Poseidon rumbled, his voice thick with a father's helpless worry. The darkness vexes him. It's more than that. Percy's voice cut through their discussion, cold and sharp. He hadn't bothered to attend the meeting in person, his projected image shimmering at the head of the table. His features were hard, his eyes burning with a cold fire. The black wound was visible even on the projection, a stark void against the fabric of his shirt. He's testing me, probing my defenses. These small attacks are distractions, meant to wear me down, to make me angry, to feed the poison he's planted. What is his endgame, then? Zeus asked, the question devoid of its usual arrogance. He was asking for guidance. Before Percy could answer, his projection flickered violently. He let out a sharp, agonized gasp, his hand flying to his temple. The connection to Olympus severed, plunging the throne room into a stunned silence. Percy stood on the beach at Camp Half-Blood, the psychic assault a physical blow. It was Erebus, his consciousness pressing in on him, not with a whisper this time, but with a triumphant, deafening roar. The wound on his shoulder flared with a cold, black fire, the pain so intense it drove him to his knees. "You see now, little star," the voice of the void boomed in his mind. "My champion was not a failure. He was the perfect delivery system. The key that unlocked your door." Through the pain, Percy could feel it. A massive, coordinated surge of Erebus's power, not just in one place, but everywhere. All at once, the fraying threads in the tapestry of life were not just tearing, they were being systematically ripped to shreds. Across the globe, nightmare fogs, nyctivore shades, and corrupted beasts were manifesting simultaneously. It was a global offensive, an all-out assault designed to overwhelm him, to stretch his power across 1,000 different fronts until he finally snapped. "Fight, little god," Erebus taunted, his voice laced with the cold amusement of a scientist watching a predictable experiment unfold. "Rage, despair, let the darkness inside you feast. Let it grow. Show them all the monster you are destined to become." Percy grit his teeth, pushing back against the psychic intrusion. "You won't win," he projected, his will a defiant spear against the oppressive darkness. "I have already won," Erebus replied, and the confidence in that thought was absolute. "You believe my goal is to conquer your world, to smother your light. How small you think. My goal is not to unmake your reality. My goal is to have you do it for me." A vision, a final, terrible revelation, flooded Percy's mind. He saw himself, his eyes glowing with a black, chaotic light. The wound having consumed him entirely. He saw himself unleashing the full, untamed power of the 10 tails, not to create, but to destroy. He saw himself wielding the creation of all things in reverse, speaking a word of command and watching as reality itself unraveled, collapsing into a single, perfect point of absolute nothingness. He saw himself become the catalyst for a new genesis, a genesis of pure, silent void. The vision was the final piece of the puzzle. Erebus didn't want to kill him. He wanted to corrupt him. To turn the universe's greatest defense into its ultimate destroyer. The wound wasn't just a poison. It was a seed of darkness that, once nourished by enough negative energy, would bloom and take root, hijacking his immense power for its own nihilistic purpose. The psychic contact broke. Percy was left kneeling on the sand, trembling, the terrible truth of his enemy's plan burning in his mind. He was the doomsday weapon. And the arming sequence had already begun. He staggered to his feet. He could feel the calls for help, 1,000 psychic screams from across the planet. He could feel the gods mobilizing, a frantic, futile effort to fight a war on a scale they couldn't comprehend. He could feel the darkness inside him pulsing, eagerly anticipating the feast to come. He had one chance, one desperate, sacrificial gambit. He found Annabeth in the Athena cabin. A map of the world spread before her, her face a mask of frantic concentration as she tried to coordinate the gods' hopeless defense. "Stop," he said. She looked up, her eyes widening as she saw the look on his face. The anger was gone. The coldness was gone. In their place was a grim, heartbreaking calm. It was the calm of a man who had accepted his own execution. "Percy, what is it? What's wrong?" "His plan," he began, his voice hoarse. "It's me. He's going to use me to unmake everything." He quickly explained the vision, the true purpose of the wound, the final, terrible endgame. Annabeth listened, her face growing paler with every word. When he finished, she didn't cry. She didn't panic. The strategist, the warrior, the daughter of the goddess of wisdom, took over. Her mind raced, searching for an angle, a flaw in the logic, a way out. She found none. "So we can't fight," she whispered, the conclusion dawning on her. "Every time you use your power in anger or despair, you feed it. You bring the end closer." "Yes," he said. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling for the first time. "We give it nothing to feed on," he said, his eyes meeting hers. In them, she saw a plan. A terrible, beautiful, sacrificial plan. And she understood. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "Percy, no. There has to be another way." "We both know there isn't," he said gently. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his hand, the one without the creeping black veins, warm against her skin. "He's expecting a god, a king, a warrior. He's not expecting a boy fr. own good high school who's in love with his best friend." Tears finally welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "It's not fair. It never is," he said, a sad, faint echo of his old smile touching his lips. But it's right. It's the only move we have left. They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of a world falling into chaos, a distant, unimportant roar. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was not one of passion, but of profound, heartbreaking finality. It was a goodbye. When they broke apart, her face was set with a resolve that matched his own. Then we see it through. Together. He nodded. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The world dissolved around them, not in a violent vortex, but with a gentle, final sigh. They were not going to a battlefield. They were not going to Olympus. They were going home. They materialized on the fire escape of his mother's apartment in Manhattan. Through the window, they could see Sally Jackson and Paul Blofeld, their faces etched with worry as they watched the horrifying news reports of chaos erupting across the globe. Percy didn't go inside. He couldn't. This was the place he had to protect. This small, warm circle of light and love. He looked at Annabeth, his mismatched eyes full of a love that was a fierce, burning star against the encroaching night. They'll need a leader, he said. When this is over, they'll need an architect to rebuild. I know, she whispered, her heart breaking. He focused his will, not outward, but inward. He gathered every ounce of his immense power, the force that could reforge the chains of Tartarus and sing a city to sleep. But he didn't prepare to attack. He prepared to build, to create one last, ultimate time. He could feel Erebus's consciousness descending, drawn to the massive flare of power he was gathering. The void was coming, expecting the final, corrupted bloom of its doomsday weapon. It was coming to watch its victory. Ready? He asked Annabeth, his voice steady. She squeezed his hand, her knuckles white. Ready? He closed his eyes. He let go of his anger. He let go of his fear. He let go of his grief. He let go of the king, the god, the weapon. He found that quiet place inside himself. The pier at Camp Half-Blood, and he held onto it with all his might. He poured every good memory he had, every ounce of love for his mother, for his friends, for the incredible, infuriating, beautiful woman standing beside him, into the power he was about to unleash. The black wound on his shoulder began to pulse, sensing the immense surge of energy, expecting a feast of rage and despair. Percy Jackson, the sage of the seas, opened his eyes. And gave it none. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The God of a New Genesis. The sky above Manhattan tore open. It was not a storm of clouds and lightning, but a wound in the fabric of reality itself. A perfect, silent, circular abyss of absolute blackness descended over the city, swallowing the light, the sound, the very feeling of life. This was Erebus, drawn from his timeless void by the flare of Percy's power, descending to witness the final, triumphant act of his grand design, the self-immolation of reality at the hands of its greatest champion. Percy stood on the fire escape, a single, defiant point of light against the encroaching oblivion. Annabeth was at his side, her hand in his, a steadfast anchor in a universe that was coming undone. He could feel the cold, vast consciousness of Erebus pressing in, a palpable wave of triumphant nihilism. He could feel the wound on his shoulder pulsing in hungry, eager response. A gateway preparing to open and unleash the corrupted power that would unmake everything. The void was expecting a scream of rage, a final, despairing roar that would feed the seed of darkness and allow it to consume him. Percy gave it a whisper of love. He closed his eyes, and instead of pushing his power outward as a weapon, he pulled it inward, into a single, infinitely dense point in the center of his being. He gathered not just his chakra, but his very essence. Every memory. The taste of his mother's blue cookies, the sting of saltwater on his face, the shared laughter with Grover. The weight of the sky on his shoulders, the first time he held Annabeth's hand. He poured his life, his identity, his soul into this single point. The black wound on his shoulder, the seed of Erebus, recoiled. It had come for a feast of rage and had been offered a sacrament of pure, unconditional love. It was an energy it could not consume, a concept it could not comprehend. It was anathema to its very being. What are you doing? The thought from Erebus was not a taunt, but a sliver of genuine, dawning confusion. This was not part of the equation. Percy didn't answer. He opened his eyes, and they were no longer a mismatched pair of warrior and sage. Both now shone with a brilliant, white gold light, the unified power of creation untainted by anger or fear. He looked at Annabeth, and in that single, final glance, he poured everything he was, everything he had ever been, into her. A silent thank you, a silent goodbye. Tengai Shinsei, the name of the technique whispered through his mind. A memory from a world he had never known. But he was not pulling a meteor from the heavens to destroy. He was birthing a star in his own heart to create. He released the point of energy. It was not an explosion. It was a birth. A wave of pure, white gold light erupted from him. It was not a destructive blast, but a gentle, irresistible wave of pure genesis. It did not push the darkness back, it filled it. It did not fight the void, it gave it form. The wave washed over the wound on his shoulder. The black, dead veins of nothingness were not burned away. They were infused with light, transformed. The seed of destruction forcibly rewritten into a seed of creation. The poison was neutralized, the gateway sealed. The light washed over Annabeth, but it did not harm her. It flowed through her, a warm, loving caress that carried with it the entirety of his soul. In that instant, she lived his life with him, felt his every joy, his every sorrow. She understood him, in that moment, more completely than any being had ever understood another. And she felt him let go. The light expanded, a silent, perfect sphere of creation. It met the descending abyss of Erebus. The two forces, the ultimate yin and the ultimate yang, did not collide. They merged. Erebus was the concept of nothingness, a sentient void. Percy's attack was the concept of everything, a sentient creation. He was not destroying his enemy. He was giving his enemy the one thing it lacked, a universe of its own to define itself against. The golden light became a new Big Bang. A universe born from a single, selfless act of love. Percy's memories, his essence, became the foundational laws of this new reality. His love for Annabeth became the force of gravity, binding the new stars together. His loyalty to his friends became the strong nuclear force, holding the atoms of this new reality intact. His courage became the light of its first suns. His life became its life. On the fire escape, his physical form began to dissolve. He was not dying. He was translating. His body became a shimmering outline of golden light, his features softening, losing their definition as he was poured into the new universe he was creating. He was a sacrifice, not of his life, but of his self. Annabeth held his hand until the very last moment, until his fingers became motes of golden dust that slipped through her own. She was alone on the fire escape, tears streaming down her face, but she was not sad. She was filled with a profound, aching, beautiful sense of peace. She had not lost him. She knew where he had gone. The black, silent sky above Manhattan receded, its oppressive presence gone, replaced by the familiar, star-dusted night of their own reality. The global assault of Erebus's minions ceased instantly. Their power source now occupied with the task of governing a brand new cosmos. The war was over. The world was safe. Epilogue. 1 year later. The world had healed, under the guidance of Annabeth, the architect, and a humbled, cooperative council of gods. A new age of prosperity had begun. The lines between the divine and mortal worlds blurred. Demigods were no longer hidden away, but celebrated as protectors. Their powers used to help humanity rebuild and advance. The tethered, their absolute loyalty to Percy now transformed into a solemn, protective duty to his memory and his ideals. Became the vanguard of this new era. Annabeth stood in the center of a new garden on Olympus, a place that had once been a courtyard for Zeus's private brooding. It was now a place of public peace, open to god and demigod alike. In the very center of the garden was a small, thriving sapling. It had grown from a single, golden seed she had found on the fire escape after he was gone. The tree's leaves were a vibrant sea green, and its bark shimmered with a faint, internal light. It did not grow with the chaotic energy of nature, it grew with a quiet, deliberate purpose. It felt peaceful. She gently touched one of its leaves. She could feel him, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a living, breathing presence. He was not gone. He had transcended. He had become the benevolent, watchful God of the universe he had created to save their own. He was the silence between the new stars, the warmth of the new suns. He had not destroyed the darkness. He had given it a home, a purpose, a balance. Hey, seaweed brain, she whispered, a small, genuine smile on her face. The tears that came were not of sorrow, but of a quiet, enduring pride. "Look what you made." The tree's leaves rustled in a breeze that wasn't there, a gentle, loving response that only she could feel. He had not died. He had not been defeated. He had made the ultimate choice. He had given up the boy to become the creator, the warrior to become the peace. He had become the sage of a new Genesis, his story no longer one of battles and prophecies, but of a quiet, eternal, and ever-expanding love. The victory was not an ending. It was a new beginning. A universe born from a hero's heart. Chapter 10 End.